Hallo Deutschlerner! Do you have the der, die, das blues? Are you struggling to figure out the differences between der, dane, and dame? Have the differences between nominative, accusative, dative, and even genitive kept you from reaching your full potential with the German language? If you answered yes to any of these questions, this course right here is for you. By the time that you finish this course, you will be a master of all things related to the German case system, including nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. You will no longer stutter and stammer around trying to find the correct article or pronoun. You will conquer the German case system and be on your way to mastering the entirety of the German language. Welcome to Mastering the German Case System, Nominative, Accusative, Dative, and Genitive with me, Herr Antrim. I'm a passionate German teacher from the United States with over 15 years of teaching experience. I learned German the old school way, traditional classes in high school and at the university. I understand the hurdles that you're trying to overcome. On this channel, I cover all of the aspects of the German language, including grammar, vocabulary, and even tips and tricks to help you maximize your German learning. If that sounds interesting to you, hit the subscribe button down below so you never miss a video. In this course, we'll start with the very basics with the nominative case and build a solid foundation on which you can build your German learning castle. Then we will dive into the essentials of the accusative, dative, and genitive cases. Once you have a good grasp of the basics, we'll learn about pronouns, prepositions, special phrases, and a whole lot more for each case. Don't worry if German grammar jargon confuses you. I'll break down every term and explain what it means and how to use it effectively. For those of you who want to go above and beyond just this simple YouTube video, I wrote a book, and in this book I cover all of the topics in this video in much more detail, and I provide you with extra practice materials so you can internalize this information and apply it to your own German language skills. This book will give you the practical edge over all other German learners, as you will not just passively watch a video or read a book, but practice what you learn in each chapter in ways that will help you to reach German fluency. You can find this book on Amazon or pretty much anywhere that you buy books by searching for Mastering the German Case System. To help you navigate this course, I've included timestamps in the description so that you can easily find the specific lesson that you need, or you can pick up where you left off. If at any point you need clarification on something or you have questions about anything, write them in the comments down below, and I'll be happy to help. Now, let's get started on mastering the German case system. Before we get into too much of the weeds of all of this stuff, just a few things that we need to take care of. First of all, I use the same color coordinating things throughout the entire course so that you can identify the cases that are being used, even if I'm not specifically talking about that case at the time that I give the example. So if something is nominative, it will be in red. If something is in the accusative case, it will be in green. Dative, it will be blue. And of course, genitive, it will be in purple. Every time that I do a chart of any kind, whether it's a der word chart or an ein word chart or whatever other kind of chart I might throw out there, it's going to be in the order of masculine, feminine, neuter, or plural, with a few exceptions here and there where I did some trickiness. But for the most part, it's going to be masculine, feminine, neuter, and plural in that order. The very first thing that you should be asking yourself is, what is a grammatical case and why should I even care? If you go to Wikipedia, the first thing that they show up on there is this definition of what a case system is. It is a special grammatical category of noun, pronoun, adjective, participle, or numeral whose value reflects the grammatical function performed by that word in a phrase, clause, or sentence. That is a terrible definition. I can't believe anybody actually wrote that thinking that some human being was going to read it and actually understand it. So instead, I made up my own definition. Basically, this is a way to identify what a noun or pronoun is doing in a particular sentence. This also goes for the things that go with those nouns or pronouns. Now, nouns are people, places, and things and ideas, and pronouns are little words that we use to kind of replace those nouns to make it so that either it's less redundant, or it takes up less space, or it's easier to say, or a long list of other reasons we might need pronouns. Main way is that whenever you're saying things like, I am doing this, I am a pronoun, and so you're going to be using I instead of saying like, Elmo is going to the store. It's kind of annoying like that. So that's what pronouns are for, that's what nouns are for. Throughout this presentation, I will be talking about German jargon along the way, but every time that I come up with a new word, such as what I just did, I will give you a definition of what that word means and how it actually applies to you in real life. How does this actually look in practical terms? Basically, you can highlight each of the things within these sentences to show exactly how they're being used within the sentence. And while I use the color-coded version for this whenever I'm writing it out on the page here, I also use this with with the case system so that you can see exactly which part of the sentence is being used in which way. I chose masculine nouns for every single one of these things here, and I'll explain what masculine noun means here in a little bit, but basically I used the exact same sentence 3 times in a row, and I use different things at the beginning of the sentence, and this makes it so that we can emphasize one thing versus another, but we don't actually have to worry about what the meaning of the sentence is. Every one of these sentences means the man gives the boy a lollipop. Every single time, without exception, that's what these sentences say. So on this slide, you can see 3 versions of the exact same sentence. Each one has the man gives the boy a lollipop. Every single sentence says the exact same thing, but you can see in the German version of things, I can switch the word order around without changing the meaning. The boy gives the man a lollipop is different than the man gives the boy a lollipop. So when you switch the word order in English, because we don't have a case system to speak of, it makes it so that we have to rely on word order to tell us what thing is doing what within the sentence. In German, we go from der Mann to dem Jungen and einen Lutscher. These little words that we use in front of the noun show us how it's being used within the sentence. Der Mann indicates that it's the subject. He's the one that's giving something. It doesn't matter if he's the first thing in the sentence like in the first example, or if he's the third thing in the sentence like it is in the second and third examples. Dem Jungen tells us that he is the one receiving the lollipop in the sentence. The boy is the one receiving something, so that gives us dem Jungen. Einen Lutscher is used here to show us a lollipop is the thing being given by the man. Basically, all of these little words show us how it's being used within the sentence, and we don't have to worry about word order as much when we're moving things throughout the sentence. Each time that we do this, it always says the exact same thing because the case system tells us what the subject is. All of this functions relatively well in German because of the genders of nouns as well. While it is true that you will usually have the intrinsic gender of something match the grammatical gender of something, it's probably better to think of these things as separate things, because while it is der Mann for the man, and that's a masculine noun, but die Frau is a feminine noun, and it's the woman, that seems to make sense, but other nouns don't really have an intrinsic gender. There's no reason to think that a spoon is masculine, but it is der Löffel. There's no reason to think that a fork is feminine, but it is die Gabel. Each gender of a noun is assigned mostly at random. There are some tips and tricks that we'll get to here in a little bit, but basically it's kind of random, so you're just going to have to memorize the nouns as they come up. Long story short, der Mann is used to indicate masculine things, die Frau for feminine things, and das Fenster for the neuter things. This is kind of the default version of this. These words will change in front of the masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns throughout this entire course, but der is used for masculine as the default form, die for feminine, and das for neuter. If it weren't for grammatical genders in the German language, there would be no case system. It's the same reason that in English there is no case system, because we always just use the, no matter what kind of a noun it is. It's the man, the woman, the window. It doesn't matter if it is male, female, or neuter, it's just going to be the same article in front of it. But in German, because we have this case system, we have to have genders of nouns. And because we have genders of nouns, we also are allowed to use this case system. So it's kind of a catch-22. It is kind of annoying to learn while you're learning this from a language that doesn't have genders like in English, but it is something that you're going to have to kind of roll with. An example of how this works out is you are buying it is not the same thing as it is buying you in English. The word order change makes it so that this is obviously a different sentence. Du kaufst ihn is the exact same thing as ihn kaufst du, however, in German. Both of them mean you are buying it, and that it is a masculine noun. Here's a version of the same sentence, except this time we're not using it with pronouns. Instead, we're using the full written out version of things. Der Mann kauft den Mantel. The man is buying the coat. Der Mann is the man, that's masculine, and it's the subject of the sentence, so we say der Mann. Den Mantel is also masculine, so if you look up the word Mantel in a dictionary somewhere, it's going to say der Mantel, or it's going to say Mantel, and it's masculine. But whenever we're using it as the direct object, or the thing that is being acted upon within the sentence, that would be den Mantel. This shows us the same thing whenever we get to the next sentence where it says, kauft ihn, he is buying it. is replacing der Mann. That's a pronoun, he, replacing the noun, the man. Ihn is another pronoun, this one replacing den Mantel. So instead of saying the coat, we are now saying it. But both of them end up being kauft ihn. Both of them still masculine nouns, both of them still using a masculine pronoun to replace them, but because of the case system, we have and ihn to indicate which one is being used in which way. Ihn kauft is another way of saying the exact same thing, but this time drawing more attention to that direct object of the coat, but saying it again. Sometimes the article does not change between the subject and other forms, so when that happens, we do have to rely on word order in the same way that we do in the English language. So the words, the woman is buying the blouse, you can't switch those two around and say the blouse is buying the woman. That's not going to work even in German because this is a feminine noun, and feminine nouns do not change just because they are being acted upon or they're the direct object of the sentence. Die Frau kauft die Bluse. The woman is buying the blouse. Die Frau kauft die Bluse. Sie kauft sie shows you she is buying it. The only way that we really know which one is which is because the word order tells us so. Otherwise, we would assume that the second Z is the same as the first Z. It's really not clear which one is which because it's the same word. Because it's die Frau and die Bluse, it's using the same pronoun, sie and sie. So in this case, we have to use the word order to tell us which one is verbing the other, or which one is buying the other. The first case that we're going to talk about today is called the nominative case. This case is the one that is kind of the base form for all things in the German language. If you're looking up a noun in the German dictionary, you will find that this is the form that they put next to things. So it's der Mann, die Frau, das Mädchen, all of these words that you're looking up in the dictionary, they're going to be listed in the nominative case. This is basically what you're going to need for the baseline in order to set yourself up for success in the other cases. The nominative case is used for the subject of the sentence. This is the person or thing that is acting in the sentence. That's what the subject is. Usually this is the first thing in the sentence, but as I demonstrated earlier, it doesn't have to be. This is the word or words that determines the conjugation of the verb. If you're wondering about conjugation of verb, it basically is where the subject and the verb match each other. So instead of saying I goes to the store, you have to say I go or I am going to the store. So if you want to learn more about that, I do have a masterclass about the present tense conjugation, which you can find linked in the description. Definite articles are basically words to say the in English, but in German there are a bunch of different ones. If it is a masculine noun, we use the word der, as I mentioned earlier with der Mann. If it's feminine, we say die, as in die Frau. If the noun is neuter, we say das, as in das Fenster. And if a noun is plural, regardless of what the singular form would be for masculine, feminine, neuter, or any of that, we have to use the plural form with the article die as the subject. So for instance, die Kinder. Der Mann, die Frau, das Fenster, die Kinder. All of these just meaning the man, the woman, the window, and the children. If you take the last letter of each of these words, you end up with our first mnemonic device, which is Resse, or R-E-S-E. It's the last letter of the der words in the nominative case. This will come in handy whenever we get through the rest of the cases and we find the rest of our mnemonic device. We'll be using these each time that I come up with a new case. I will mention this again and again and again, but it is R-E-S-E, or what my students usually call Resse. While there are definite articles which are just words for the, there are also these things that we call additional der words, which is dieser, such as this or these, jeder, which means every, manche, which means some, solche, which means such, welche, which means which, and alle, which mean all. All of these words basically function in the same way as the der words do, so these words will end with the same letters. So for instance, I gave in the example here dieser as our example. We have dieser for masculine, diese for feminine, dieses for neuter, and diese for the plural. Again, the last letter is going to match. When you use these words and the other words that I mentioned before, the definite articles, the words der, die, das, and die, if you combine those with this category of word that I have on the screen now, these are all called der words, which for simplicity's sake is what I'm going to call them throughout the rest of this course. Here are a few examples of these words in subjects of the sentence. Der Mann fährt schnell. The man drives fast. Der Mann fährt schnell. Die Frau arbeitet fleißig. The woman works diligently. Die Frau arbeitet fleißig. Das Fenster ist kaputt. The window is broken. Das Fenster ist kaputt. Die Kinder tanzen. The children are dancing. Die Kinder tanzen. Notice the thing that is highlighted in red here is the subject of the sentence. For each one of these, this is the thing that is doing something. So the man is the one that's driving. The woman is the one that is working. The window is the one that is. I know that one doesn't sound quite right, but basically that's how that's being used here. It's the subject of the sentence because it's the thing that is being. The window is. Die Kinder tanzen. The children are dancing. The children are the ones doing something. They're the ones dancing. So in each of these, they're highlighted in red because they are the subject of the sentence. That makes them in the nominative case. So instead of saying den Mann or dem Mann, we say der Mann. You can do the same thing with these additional der words or just the der words in general. When you do that, it might look like this. Dieser Mann fährt schnell. This man drives fast. Dieser Mann fährt schnell. Jede Frau arbeitet fleißig. Every woman works diligently. Jede Frau arbeitet fleißig. Dieses Fenster ist kaputt. This window is broken. Dieses Fenster ist kaputt. Diese Kinder tanzen. These children are dancing. Diese Kinder tanzen. Again, the last letter of the der word is the important part, an R for masculine, an E for feminine, an S for neuter, and an E for plural. Indefinite articles, as contrast from the words that are definite articles, indefinite articles are words like a or an. They're used to identify something that is non-specific. So the difference between, hey, bring me that desk over there, or bring me the desk, that is different than bring me a desk. So if I'm saying a desk, I don't care which one it is. That's what we're doing with these indefinite articles. They're words for a or an. For the masculine form, we don't have an ending on the word ein, we just say ein. Feminine takes an e, so eine, and neuter also does not have an ending. While you can't say a or an followed by a plural thing, you can use these other things that we call ein words. These words are also available on the next slide where I talk about all of those words, but basically I always put these into this chart in the plural form with a little star or a K in front of them so that you know that the plural form does exist in a way and it has an E at the end of it for the nominative forms. The words that I'm listing here are the ones that I would count as the ein words. This would include all of the possessive words, mein for my, dein for your, sein for his or its, ihr for her, their, and your, unser for our, euer for your, and kein, which is not a possessive but is kind of the negative ein word. It basically means no or not a. You can see this in the example down below in the chart. Mein for the masculine, meine for the feminine, mein for the neuter, and meine for the plural. Again, throughout this course, I will just be calling these the ein words so that I don't have to tell you every time that indefinite articles are kind of the same thing and they all fall into the same category. Long story short, it's just where the highlighted E is in each of these forms, that's the extra letter that we add to it. But if you had a word like ihr, you would just have ihr for masculine, ihre for feminine, ihr for neuter, and ihre again for the plural. Here are some examples of these ein words as the subject of the sentence. Mein Hund ist mein bester Freund. My dog is my best friend. Mein Hund ist mein bester Freund. Eine Katze ist in deinem Garten. A cat is in your garden. Eine Katze ist in deinem Garten. Ein Schaf mäht. A sheep bleats. Or mows. It's kind of one of those verbs that's a little bit weird. Mähen does mean to bleat, as in the sound that a sheep makes, but it also means to mow, so depending on the context, you could say that a sheep mows the yard, or you could just say that a sheep is bleating. Both of them are kind of true. At any rate, the sentence is ein Schaf mäht, because it's a neuter noun. Seine Haustiere sind zahm. His pets are tame. Seine Haustiere sind zahm. In each of these things, again, the red things are highlighted in red because they are the subject of the sentence and they are therefore in the nominative case. You'll notice that in the first example here, we have two things that are labeled with the red form, and that is mein Hund and mein bester Freund. They are both kind of the subject in this sentence, and I'll explain that on the next slide. That sentence is an example of something we call a predicate nominative. A predicate nominative has two words that make up its name. Predicate, which just means that it's after the verb, and nominative, meaning that it's the subject case. So, together, predicate nominative just means that it's a restating of the subject after the verb. This is only possible in a couple of verbs in the German language. But basically it is if you can put an equal sign where the verb is and it still makes kind of the same sentence, what you need here is a predicate nominative. These things are also known as predicate nouns, and contrary to what that noun suggests, predicate nouns can also be pronouns. This not only tells you that it is after the verb, but it is in the nominative case. As I mentioned before, if you can use an equal sign where the verb is, that of course tells you that you need a predicate nominative. There are three verbs in the German language that can do this. Sein, which means to be, werden, which means to become, and bleiben, which means to stay or remain. For example, ich bin ein Mann. I am a man. Both I and a man are the same thing. If I switched it around and said, ein Mann bin ich, a man am I, it basically means the same thing. You could also think of it as ich equal ein Mann, I equal a man. Wird mein 5. Mann. He becomes, or will be, my 5th husband. Wird mein 5. Mann. Again, if you put an equal sign in between here, you would have he equals my 5th husband. Again, it basically means the same thing, so we have a predicate nominative. Sie bleibt meine Freundin. She remains my girlfriend. Sie bleibt meine Freundin. She remains my girlfriend. Again, it's basically the same thing if you said she equals my girlfriend. She remains my girlfriend. Another use for the nominative case is when you're directly talking to someone. Usually this doesn't matter, as you would just use their name, and if you say Bob, no one cares that this is the subject of the sentence, or if it's nominative, or any of the other cases. No one really cares. But occasionally, especially if you're going to use an adjective in front of it, then you do need to. So for instance, if you want to say, young man, please don't do that, you would say, junger Mann, tu das bitte nicht. It's junger Mann because this is in the nominative case, because we are addressing this person directly. Junger Mann, tu das bitte nicht. The same thing is true if you want to say, my dear husband, I want to get divorced from you. Mein lieber Mann, ich will mich von dir scheiden lassen. Again, we say mein lieber Mann because we're directly addressing that person, and therefore they are in the nominative case. If you're loving this deep dive into the German case system, imagine how much more you'll get from my book. Packed with detailed explanations, practice exercises, and bonus materials, this is your ultimate guide to mastering German. Check it out on Amazon or your favorite bookstore. The second case that we're going to talk about is called the accusative case. This case is primarily used for direct objects. The direct object is going to be explained in another slide, but just know that I'm going to tell you what that is if you don't understand it. There's a lot of overlap between the nominative and accusative cases, which makes it super simple if you just learn the nominative case to continue on to the accusative case. The accusative case is also used for a variety of other things, including specific time and a variety of prepositions. Direct objects. The nominative case is reserved for the subject, the one that is doing something within the sentence. I've already mentioned that. If the action of the sentence is directed towards a person or thing, the person or thing that is acted upon is in the accusative case. That's the direct object. If you look it up on Google, the thing that it's going to tell you for the definition is a noun phrase denoting a person or thing that is the recipient of the action of the transitive verb. That's a lot of words that mean basically nothing to everyone that has ever read them. However, there is a much simpler way of saying this. What is being verbed? If you verb something, that something is the direct object. If I buy something, that something is the direct object. If I throw something, that something is the direct object. If I hit something, that something is the direct object. You get the idea. Whatever it is that I am verbing, whatever is being verbed within that sentence, that thing is the direct object, and in German, that will be shown in the accusative case. For example, Ich werfe den Ball. I am throwing the ball. Den Ball is the direct object. It is being thrown. It's the object of the sentence. It is den Ball instead of the normal der Ball. Mag dich. He likes you. Dich is the direct object, as you are the one that is being liked. Der Mann kauft den Traktor. The man is buying the tractor. Again, the tractor is the thing being bought and therefore is the direct object and shown in the accusative case in green. Das Mädchen liest das Buch. The girl is reading the book. Das Mädchen liest das Buch. The book, of course, is the direct object. It's the thing being read by the girl. Therefore, it is highlighted in green. This one does not show a change between das Mädchen and das Buch. Since they're both neuter nouns, we have to rely on word order to tell us which one is doing which. It also kinda helps that books can't read people nearly as well as people can read books. If you were paying attention to the details in that last set of examples, you'll notice that the definite articles, or the der words, will only have one small change between the nominative and accusative cases. Der, for masculine nouns, is now den instead, so it was den Traktor, for example. The same is true for the additional der words that we had before, so for example, dieser changes to diesen in the accusative case. The rest of the forms stay the same. Dieser, dieses, dieser, or die, das, and die. This also gives us the second version of our mnemonic device, so now we have the nominative case, rese, R-E-S-E, and now the accusative case, nesse, N-E-S-E, rese, nesse. Here are some examples of how to use the direct object in the accusative case in German. Der Mann hat den Ball. The man has the ball. Der Mann hat den Ball. Die Frau bäckt die Torte. Die Frau backt die Torte. The woman bakes the cake. You'll notice that I have the verb written twice here. That's because this is a weird verb. No one can really decide for some reason if it has an umlaut or it doesn't have an umlaut. In fact, if you look it up on Duden, there are two different versions that are listed. I prefer the version that has an umlaut, but it's kind of a personal preference or a regional dialect difference. Die Frau bäckt die Torte. Die Frau backt die Torte. Das Mädchen sagt das Wort. The girl says the word. Das Mädchen sagt das Wort. Die Kinder bauen die Sandburgen. The children build the sandcastles. Die Kinder bauen die Sandburgen. And now with the additional der words. Dieser Mann sieht jeden Film. This man sees every film. Dieser Mann sieht jeden Film. Diese Frau weiß jede Antwort. This woman knows every answer. Diese Frau weiß jede Antwort. Dieses Mädchen lässt dieses Buch zu Hause. This girl leaves this book at home. Dieses Mädchen lässt dieses Buch zu Hause. Diese Kinder finden alle Hinweise. These children find all clues. Diese Kinder finden alle Hinweise. For the indefinite articles, or the words for a, there is also only one change, the masculine form. Ein now becomes einen. For those of you who are keeping score at home, that means that only the masculine forms for the nominative and accusative cases change between nominative and accusative. That goes for both der words and ein words. The same thing is true with the additional ein words, which include the possessive mein. Mein is now meinen for the accusative form. Here are a few examples of how those would look. Ein Mann hält einen Hund in der Hand. A man is holding a dog in his hand. Ein Mann hält einen Hund in der Hand. Eine Lehrerin unterrichtet eine Klasse. A teacher teaches a class. Eine Lehrerin unterrichtet eine Klasse. Ein Mädchen führt ein Pony. A girl is leading a pony. Ein Mädchen führt ein Pony. Meine Kinder bringen ihre Spielzeuge. My children bring their toys. Meine Kinder bringen ihre Spielzeuge. Sein Vater fragt unseren Kellner. His father asks our waiter.
Sein Vater fragt unseren Kellner. Eure Mutter stellt ihre Frage. Your mother asks her question. Eure Mutter stellt ihre Frage. Unser Kind kennt mein sprechendes Pferd. Our child knows my talking horse. Unser Kind kennt mein sprechendes Pferd. Ihre Kinder spielen meine Brettspiele. Their children play my board games. Ihre Kinder spielen meine Brettspiele. One of the other uses of the accusative case is specific time. I mean specific time as in this morning or this afternoon or today. All of those are specific time things. This is different than the non-specific time, which is used in the genitive case later on in this course, but those things are things like one day or someday. Those are kind of hypothetical. They're not quite static things. We can't say that it's on that particular day. So that is not a specific time. What we're using here are in the accusative case, so these are specific times. Heute Morgen would be this morning. Heute Abend would be this evening. In those two examples, no one cares that they're accusative. They are, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes it does matter, however. So, for example, jeden Tag esse ich Wurst. Every day I eat sausage. Jeden Tag has every day. This has an N at the end of jeden to tell us that this is accusative and masculine. Jede Nacht schlafe ich 6 Stunden. Every night I sleep 6 hours. Jede Nacht schlafe ich 6 Stunden. Jede Nacht is in the accusative case, and as such, jede has an E at the end of it. Nächsten Dienstag spiele ich Fußball. Next Tuesday I am playing soccer. Nächsten has an en at the end of it because, again, it's masculine and accusative. Nächsten Dienstag spiele ich Fußball.
If you're finding these lessons helpful so far, wait until you get your hands on my book. It's got all of the details in this video, plus extra stuff, including extra exercises and downloadable materials to ensure you truly master the German case system. Search for Mastering the German Case System wherever you buy books.
Our third case for today is the dative case. The dative case is primarily used with indirect objects, which I'll explain in the next slide. There's not a lot of overlap between the nominative, accusative, and the dative cases. While the nominative and accusative only had one small change, the dative case is completely different. The dative case is also used for other things other than just the indirect object, such as dative verbs, special dative constructions, and a variety of prepositions. An indirect object receives the direct object as a result of the verb and is represented in the dative case. Gib ihm das Buch. Give him the book. Ihm is the indirect object, or him in the English sentence. If you're looking for a short version of this, it's basically who or what, usually it's a who, that is receiving the direct object of the sentence. So in this case, the book is the direct object, him is the one that's receiving that direct object. Here are some examples of indirect objects in German. Ich gebe dem Mann den Kaffee. I am giving the man the coffee. Ich gebe dem Mann den Kaffee. Kauft seiner Mutter eine Blume. He is buying his mother a flower. Kauft seiner Mutter eine Blume. Wir schenken den Kindern Fahrräder. We are giving the children bicycles as gifts. Wir schenken den Kindern Fahrräder. In each of these sentences, the red one is the one doing something. That's the nominative case. That's the subject of the sentence. The green one is the one that is being acted upon, being given, bought, or given. The blue one receives the green one, so the man receives the coffee, his mother receives a flower, and the children receive bicycles. None of the definite articles in the dative case are the same as what they were in the nominative and accusative cases. So the nominative case, der, becomes dem in the dative case. Die, as the feminine word, now becomes der instead. The neuter one now matches the masculine one, which is dem, and the plural one is now den, which looks a lot like the accusative masculine form. Long story short, we now have dem, der, dame, and dane. This gives us our third version of the mnemonic device. R-E-S-E for nominative, resse, N-E-S-E for accusative, nesse, M-R-M-N for dative, merman. You'll also notice there is an N in parentheses in the plural form. That's because at the end of a noun in the plural form for the dative case, we have to also add an N to the end of the noun in addition to just using the article den. So for instance, in the example I gave before, den Kindern was the children. Kinder is normally the plural, but we added an extra N to make it dative and plural. Den Kindern. I mentioned before that I always put things in the order of masculine, feminine, neuter, and plural, but this is mostly just because that's the way that I was personally taught. Many other teachers will actually use masculine, neuter, feminine, plural. That gives us so that the masculine and neuter forms, when they line up in the dative case, they are next to each other, so we have dem and dame. It also shows us then that the feminine and plural forms in the nominative and accusative cases are the same here, so we say D for all 4 of those spots. If you prefer this version, you can go with this version of the chart, but if you don't need a chart, you don't need a chart, so it doesn't really matter. But if you like charts, this version is okay as well as the version that I had. I personally don't have a preference, it's just that I was taught with masculine, feminine, neuter, plural, so that's the way that I teach it. If you look at the Der Words version of this chart, you end up with all of these. Dieser now is diesem, diese is now dieser, dieses is now diesem, and diese is now diesen. Again, the last letter always matches. Ressa, Nessa, Merman. Ressa, Nessa, Merman. As I mentioned before, the N at the end of that chart is there for the plural dative, because in the plural dative form of things, we have to also have an N at the end of the noun. The example I gave before, das Kind is the singular the child, die Kinder is normally the plural for the children, and in the dative case we also add an extra N to the end of the noun to give us den Kindern, the children, den Kindern. Here are a few examples of indirect objects with definite articles. Der Arzt gibt dem Patienten den Zettel. The doctor gives the patient the slip of paper. Der Arzt gibt dem Patienten den Zettel. Die Schülerin sagt der Lehrerin die Antwort. The student tells the teacher the answer. Die Schülerin sagt der Lehrerin die Antwort. Das Mädchen gibt dem Pferd das Heu. The girl gives the horse the hay. Das Mädchen gibt dem Pferd das Heu. Die Eltern zeigen den Kindern die Spielzeuge. The parents show the children the toys. Die Eltern zeigen den Kindern die Spielzeuge. The dative case is the first time when the definite article endings match the indefinite article endings. That means that we now have M, R, M, N for the endings that go on the ein words. While before there was no ending on the nominative masculine or on the nominative neuter, and an E for feminine and plural, an EN for the accusative masculine, and then the other ones are the same as they were in the nominative for the accusative case. But now in the dative case we have EM, ER, EM, and EN. So we now have Merman that works for both definite articles and indefinite articles. Einem, einer, einem, keinen. Of course, you can still use this with the additional ein words, so here's a list of those using mein as an example. Meinem, meiner, meinem, meinen for the dative case. Here are a few examples of indirect objects with ein words. Ein Junge bringt meinem Sohn einen Lutscher. A boy brings my son a lollipop. Ein Junge bringt meinem Sohn einen Lutscher. Eine Frau stellt ihrer Professorin eine Frage. A woman asks her professor a question. Eine Frau stellt ihrer Professorin eine Frage. Ein Mädchen erzählt ihrem Hampelmännchen ein Märchen. A girl tells her jumping jack toy a fairy tale. Ein Mädchen erzählt ihrem Hampelmännchen ein Märchen. Meine Lehrer bringen meinen Mitschülern ihre Kenntnisse bei. My teachers teach my classmates their knowledge. Meine Lehrer bringen meinen Mitschülern ihre Kenntnisse bei. Besides being used with the indirect object, the dative case can also be used with certain objects of certain verbs that instead of using the accusative case, they will actually be used with the dative case. This is usually used with people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be used with a person. Here's an example. Mein Bruder hilft unseren Eltern mit der Hausreinigung. My brother helps our parents with the housekeeping. Our parents here are the object of the dative verb helfen, which is hilft in this form. Unseren Eltern is shown here in the dative case because of that fact. My brother is helping someone. That someone is the direct object. Normally the direct object is shown in the accusative case, but because the verb helfen requires the dative case, we say unseren Eltern instead of unsere Eltern. Das T-Shirt passt dem Mann nicht. The T-shirt does not fit the man. Das T-Shirt passt dem Mann nicht. It is dem Mann in this sentence because the verb passen requires a dative object. Normally speaking, das T-Shirt would be the subject, and dem Mann would be the direct object, which would usually require the accusative case, but we use the dative here because the verb passen makes us do that. Here are some more examples. Die Fliege steht dir gut. The bow tie looks good on you. You in this sentence is the dative thing. Die Fliege steht dir gut. Diese Filme gefallen mir nicht. I do not like these films. This sentence literally says, these films are not pleasing to me. This is because the verb gefallen kind of functions backwardsly from what it is in the English language. These films are not pleasing to me. Diese Filme gefallen mir nicht. Der Kunde dankt dem Kellner. The customer thanks the waiter. Der Kunde dankt dem Kellner. Again, the one in red, the customer, der Kunde, is thanking someone. The someone that is being thanked is the direct object, which usually would be accusative, but now we're using the dative because danken requires dative. Dem Kellner instead of den Kellner. Der Klasse fehlt Klaus heute. The class is missing Klaus today. This one works backwardsly in the same way that gefallen did earlier. Normally we would think Klaus is missing from class, but der Klasse is used here in the dative case and Klaus is in the nominative. Der Klasse fehlt Klaus heute. There are a ton of dative verbs, and if you really want to get into the weeds with that, there's a video linked in the description for a huge list of dative verbs, but the main ones that you should probably familiarize yourself with first are these. Antworten, to answer. Beantworten is actually used with the accusative case and it means to answer a question, but if you're answering a person, you need the verb antworten. Danken means to thank. Gefallen means to please. Gehören means to belong to. Glauben means to believe. Gratulieren means to congratulate. Helfen means to help. Passieren means to happen. So if something happens to someone, that person is in the dative case. Schmecken means to taste. There are a few rare instances in which dative verbs will actually use the accusative case in addition to using the dative case, or they will bypass the dative case and only use the accusative case. For example, using the verb glauben, which means to believe. Ich glaube dir nicht. I don't believe you. This would be a normal sentence, ich being the subject, dir being the object, which is used in the dative case. Ich glaube dir deine Geschichte nicht, which is, I don't believe your story from you. You again is still in the dative case, but now we added an extra object, your story, deine Geschichte. Deine Geschichte is used in the accusative case, because it's the thing that I'm not believing. Dir tells us from whom the story came, so dir instead of just du. Ich glaube dir deine Geschichte nicht. Ich glaube deine Geschichte nicht. I don't believe your story. In this sentence, we remove the you from the sentence, but we can still say, I don't believe your story. Because we're not using a person as the direct object here, we don't use the dative case. Instead, we use the accusative. Here's another example of the same thing, this time using the verb verzeihen, which means to forgive. Verzeiht mir nicht. He does not forgive me. Verzeiht mir nicht. Verzeiht mir meinen Fehler nicht. He does not forgive me my mistake. Verzeiht mir meinen Fehler nicht. Verzeiht meinen Fehler nicht. He does not forgive my mistake. Verzeiht meinen Fehler nicht. Again, it basically follows the same pattern. In the first one, we just have a person that is the direct object, so we use the dative case. In the second one, we have a direct object that is not a person, my mistake, and then an indirect object, me, the person from whom the mistake came. And then in the last example, we just have the mistake, which is not a person, but still the direct object, and therefore accusative. It's also quite common for certain prefixes to trigger the dative case with certain verbs. Usually these are separable prefixes. Konnte seinem Schicksal nicht entgehen. He could not avoid his fate. His fate here is the thing that he could not avoid, which makes it the direct object. But because the verb entgehen has ent in front of it, we have to use here the dative case, seinem Schicksal. Konnte seinem Schicksal nicht entgehen. Marlin schwimmt dem Doktorfisch nach. Marlin swims after the tang, which is a type of fish. Nach is another way of using the dative case. This is a separable prefix that's attached to the verb nachschwimmen. We put it at the end of the sentence here because it's a separable prefix. All of this is to say that dem Doktorfisch is used in the dative case because this prefix nach triggers the dative case. Marlin schwimmt dem Doktorfisch nach. Hört mir zu. Listen to me. Mir is the object here, and this is used in the dative case because of the prefix zu, which triggers the dative. Hört mir zu. In addition to the indirect objects and, of course, the dative verbs, there are certain constructions that are going to be used with the dative case. This is also known as the dative of interest. Certain adjectives are commonly used with the dative case. This happens a lot with the verb sein, which is why some websites will claim that the dative case is used because of the verb sein, which in reality is obviously not the case. It's just that the adjective triggered the dative case. Here's an example. Ihm ist kalt. He is cold. In other words, it is cold to him. Because it's not literally he is cold, which would be ist kalt, because that's not what we're saying, we have to use ihm here. If you say ist kalt, you're actually saying he shows little emotion, or he doesn't actually pretend to care about what's going on. He is cold, as in, you're as cold as ice, you're willing to sacrifice our love. Yeah, I know, that was terrible, but you get the idea. If it's cold as in the person themselves is actually cold, that's different than the surroundings around them makes them feel cold, which is ihm ist kalt. So, this dative of interest, it is cold in relation to that person, that uses the dative case. This actually happens because it was originally used with es, as in it is cold to that person, so es ist mir kalt, es ist mir kühl, es ist mir warm, es ist mir heiß. All of those used to be the real way that we said this, and over time we just got rid of the es, and we just put mir in front to make it so that it draws more attention to me, which of course is very egocentric of the language. Mir ist kalt. It's cold to me. Mir ist kühl. It's cool to me. Mir ist warm. It's warm to me. Mir ist heiß. It's hot to me. Here are a few other examples that aren't weather-related. Ist seinem Vater sehr ähnlich. He is very similar to his father. Ist seinem Vater sehr ähnlich. Ich bin diesem Mann dankbar. I am thankful to this man. Ich bin diesem Mann dankbar. Es kommt mir fremd vor. That seems foreign to me. Es kommt mir fremd vor. As I mentioned, it's actually the adjective that triggers the dative case here. So here's a list of other adjectives that do the same thing. Ähnlich, which means similar. Angenehm, which means comfortable. Begreiflich, which is reachable. Behilflich, which is helpful. And if you want the full list, they're on the screen there. But these are all adjectives that use the dative case in the German language because the adjective triggers the dative. It's the dative of interest, or the special dative construction.
If you're serious about mastering German, my book is the perfect companion to this video. It includes everything that we're covering and much, much more, with exercises to practice and reinforce your skills. Head over to Amazon or your favorite bookstore and grab your copy now.
Our fourth and final case is the genitive case, or the Genitive. This is primarily used for possession. Not that kind of possession, but just showing that someone owns something, or someone has something, or this thing is possessed by that other person. Just like in the dative case, the feminine forms are der and einer for the genitive. The genitive case is also used for a variety of other things, including indefinite time, which I kind of mentioned earlier when talking about the accusative case, certain verbs, special genitive construction, and certain prepositions, which of course I'll explain in detail all later. As I mentioned before, the genitive case is primarily used for possession, and while the English has adopted an apostrophe between the noun and the s, German has not. It's become popular in Germany in recent years to use a possessive apostrophe, but this is actually unaffectionately referred to as the Deppenapostroph, which is the fool's apostrophe. You can find this at deppenapostroph.info, and you can find examples such as the ones that I have on the screen here for just fools adding apostrophes to things where they don't belong, such as Doris Weltlernpad, which is Dory's World Learning Pad, but Dory doesn't need an IE plus an S and then an apostrophe S. I don't know, there's a lot going on in that one, but Dory is D-O-R-Y and then apostrophe S in English, but just S in German. There's no reason for any of this to ever have an IE. And then stark fürs Leben would be strong for life, and this just doesn't get an apostrophe because that's not how prepositions work in German. So, long story short, people put apostrophes where they don't belong, and in German, most of the time the possessive does not need an apostrophe, it's just an S. For example, if you have a person's name and you want to say that that person owns a thing, you could say Bob's boat, for example, so that Bob owns the boat. That means that we have Bob's, just add S, boat. Bob's boat. Apostrophe S in English, no apostrophe in German. If the name ends with S or Z, then we have to add an apostrophe as well. So in German, we would say Klaus Haus. In English, it is actually optional to either add apostrophe or apostrophe S. I personally like the one with the extra S, but that's just my personal preference. You could say Klaus Haus or Klaus's house. Either way works just fine. Bob's boat, Klaus Haus. You may have learned in German class at some point that you can use von, which is a preposition that uses the dative case, and you can use this to show possession, and while this is technically true, it isn't the preferred version of how to use a possessive in German. So basically you should be removing the von out of the sentence and make it genitive instead. Or as I tell my students, genitive. It takes the von out of things. So for example, you could say die Farbe von dem Hemd, which is the color of the shirt. Or you could use the genitive case and say die Farbe des Hemdes, which is the color of the shirt. Both of them say of the shirt, but the difference is that in German you don't need the preposition von, instead you could use the genitive case, which is easier and simpler to use. So of course we don't have to do that. No von in the German, use the genitive case instead. This finally gives us our last version of the definite articles chart. So we now have der, die, das, die for the nominative, den, die, das, die for the accusative, dem, der, den for the dative, and des, der, for the genitive. This gives us our final version of the mnemonic device, which now gives us ressa, nessa, merman, sursur, SRSR, sursur for the genitive. You'll also notice that I have more letters in parentheses, similar to what we did with the dative case, and that's because at the end of a masculine or neuter noun in the genitive case, you will have to add an S to the end of things. Sometimes this is also an ES, but I'll show exactly how that works in a second. If you wanted to use the additional der words, it would look something like this, where you have dieser, jeder, manche, solche, welche, all of those things. Here's a close-up version. Dieser changes to dieses. Dieser changes to dieser. Dieses is now, again, dieses, so it went full circle there on us, and dieser is now dieser. Long story short, the endings are the same as they were on the der words, S, R, S, R. Dieses, dieser, dieses, dieser. Now, to understand the rule that I had mentioned before, when do you add S and when do you add ES if it's masculine or neuter? The easy answer is if it has one syllable, add ES. So in the word Mann, we have one syllable, so we add ES when making it genitive. Der Hut des Mannes, the hat of the man. Der Hut des Mannes. We add ES because Mann has one syllable. Auto, by contrast, has two syllables, Auto. So when we add the S at the end of this one, we just simply add S. Die Farbe des Autos, the color of the car. One syllable, add ES. Two or more syllables, add just S. When you are using a feminine or plural noun, do not add S or ES. It is the same for both feminine and plural. The article changes, but there is nothing added to the noun itself. Die Farbe der Krawatte, the color of the tie. Die Farbe der Krawatte. Die Telefonnummer der Nachbarn, the telephone number of the neighbors. The cool thing about the genitive case is that you can literally use it after all of the other cases, which is why I usually wait until the end to teach it, because you can use the genitive case after something in the nominative. You can again use it after something in the dative or in the accusative case, because it's used as a possessive. It's saying the man's wife in the first example here, die Ehefrau des Mannes. The man's is the one that's possessing, so that's genitive. But in German, it goes after the noun that is being possessed. So we could actually translate this as the wife of the man, die Ehefrau des Mannes. We can break this sentence apart and just say, die Ehefrau gibt dem Sohn den Schlüssel, which is the wife gives the son the key. All of this is to say we have a subject, an indirect object, and a direct object. But I threw in an extra possessive for each one of them. So now it reads, die Ehefrau des Mannes gibt dem Sohn des Ehepaars den Schlüssel des Autos. The man's wife gives the couple's son the car key, or the keys of the car. Die Farbe des Kellers gefällt dem Mann des Hauses nicht. The man of the house does not like the color of the basement. Or, the man of the house doesn't like the basement's color. Again, we're showing in purple the thing that is doing the possessing, the basement or the house in this sentence. Des Kellers is of the basement, and des Hauses is of the house. Both of these are showing the possession. You could say the basement's color or the house's man. Wir mieten den größten Konzertsaal der Stadt für die Geburtstagsparty der Frau. We are renting the largest concert hall of the city for the birthday party of the woman. Here I use two of them, both of them feminine, so der Stadt and der Frau. This is of the city and of the woman. You could also say the city's or the woman's. Wir mieten den größten Konzertsaal der Stadt für die Geburtstagsparty der Frau. In the next one I used a plural noun. Die Fragen der Prüfungen waren nicht sehr schwierig. The questions of the test were not very difficult, or the test's questions were not very difficult. Die Fragen der Prüfung waren nicht sehr schwierig. Similar to all of the ones that I've shown you so far, the ein words mirror the der words, so we now have eines, einer, eines, and keiner. Again, SR, SR. Here they are in example sentences. Die Frau meines Bruders verkauft dem Sohn eines Lehrers die Tür eines Käfers. The wife of my brother is selling the son of a teacher the door of a beetle. VW, that is. My brother's wife is selling a teacher's son a beetle door. Die Frau meines Bruders verkauft dem Sohn eines Lehrers die Tür eines Käfers. Die Fenster eines Hauses können die Effizienz eines Heizungssystems beeinflussen. The windows of a house can influence the efficiency of a heating system, or the house windows can influence the heating system's efficiency. Die Fenster eines Hauses können die Effizienz eines Heizungssystems beeinflussen. Die Geschichte seiner Flucht ist sehr beeindruckend. The story of his escape is very impressive. His escape story is very impressive. Die Geschichte seiner Flucht ist sehr beeindruckend. Das Auto meiner Eltern steht vor dem Haus meiner Freunde. The car of my parents is standing in front of the house of my friends. My parents' car is standing in front of my friend's house. Das Auto meiner Eltern steht vor dem Haus meiner Freunde. Alright, now it's time for our first side note, and this side note is about adjectives and articles and possessive pronouns and everything in between. Basically, the genitive case is used to express possession, and the possessive adjectives such as mine, dine, sein, and so on are technically a kind of pronoun used in the genitive case. They represent a person or thing that is in possession of something. So instead of saying Bob's Krawatte, we can say seine Krawatte, his tie. Confusingly, these things are actually officially called possessive adjectives, which leads to some confusion because they act like articles more than they act like adjectives. Even the adjectives after these words act like adjectives after ein words. You didn't even notice anything weird about them whenever I listed them as ein words for this entire course, because it just makes sense that these are articles and not pronouns or adjectives. For this reason, I usually refer to these things like mine, dine, sein, ihr, unser, and euer as possessive articles, even though technically this term is not widely accepted. To complicate this matter even more, there are times when you would use a possessive pronoun as an actual pronoun, meaning that it replaces a noun. In English, we say things like mine or his or yours. These are the same type of thing in the German language. True genitive pronouns do actually exist, but they are so incredibly rare that most Germans would balk at their use. There will always be another way to phrase the sentence that you want to say without having to use an actual genitive pronoun. But this wouldn't be a masterclass if I didn't mention that they exist. So if you look at a traditional pronouns chart, you usually just have nominative, accusative, and dative. If we add in the genitive case, we now have one column for each of the cases to go along with all of the pronouns. So instead of ich, we now have mich, mir, and mine. That's I, me, another me, and my. Du, dich, dir, dein. You, you, and your. Ihn, ihm, sein. He, him, the other him, and his. You get the idea. These are the possessives that I've been using throughout this entire course that are just used here as possessive articles. Here are examples of how this might work. Das ist mein Hut. That is my hat. Du hast meinen Hut. You have my hat. Technically speaking, these are possessive adjectives, but I usually call them possessive articles because they act like articles. They take the same endings that ein words do, and adjectives that follow them act as if they were preceded by an ein word. A possessive pronoun, by contrast, would be Nein, das ist meiner. No, this is mine. Du hast deinen. You have yours. Both of these are possessive pronouns, but no one calls them anything other than that because that's the only use they have. They're being used as pronouns. They're replacing mein Hut and meinen Hut in each of the examples. Meiner and deinen. Long story short, both possessive articles or adjectives and possessive pronouns are sort of genitive pronouns. They show possession and they replace a noun. That's what pronouns do. This is the reason for this side note and why it's included amongst the genitive case information. It is possible to use a possessive pronoun as an actual pronoun. So, for instance, in the example down below, which is highlighted. Ich habe ein Hemd gefunden. I found a shirt. Das ist meins. That is mine. Meins is used for a neuter noun in either the nominative or the accusative case whenever you're showing something that is mine without having any extra noun behind it. It's just meins. You could say das ist mein Hemd and say the exact same thing, that is my shirt. But if you don't want to say the word shirt again, you can just say das ist meins. If you are using those as actual pronouns, this is what the pronoun chart would look like. In the nominative case, masculine forms will have an ER at the end of it, so that is meiner. So if we're talking about a hat, you would say das ist meiner, that is mine. If you're talking about something feminine, such as a flower, das ist meine, that is mine. If it's neuter, you say meins, das ist meins, that is mine, as the example I just gave. If it's plural, you would say meine. For the accusative case, everything is the same. We have meinen for the masculine form, meine for the feminine form, meins again for the neuter form, and meine for the plural. The only change again is going to be that en at the end of the accusative masculine form, just like we did when we had the ein words chart. In the dative case, everything is exactly the same as it was for the Einwords chart, and the same thing is going to happen in the genitive case. We just have MR, and SR. Same thing happens for all of those that normally would happen if we just had an Einword. Here are a few more examples of how you might use this. Wo ist dein Schuh? Meiner ist da. Where is your shoe? Mine is there. Meiner is used here because this is in the nominative case, referring back to a masculine noun, your shoe. Hast du deinen Schuh? Ja, ich habe meinen. Do you have your shoe? Yes, I have mine. Mine in this one is referring back to a masculine noun again, but this time using it as the direct object. So we say meinen instead of meiner. Hast du einen Schuh? Ja. Was machst du dann mit meinem? Do you have a shoe? Yes. What are you doing with mine then? With mine is used in the dative case, which is why we say mit meinem. It's still referring back to the same masculine noun as before, einen Schuh. Another use of the genitive case is time, so we can use time in the accusative case whenever it's a specific time, but if we want to use something that is more abstract, we have to use the genitive case. So I would say, jeden Tag esse ich Eis. Every day I eat ice cream. But I would say, eines Tages werde ich aufhören. Someday I will stop. This is not a specific day, this is just some hypothetical. It's a non-specific time. Therefore we have to say eines Tages for the genitive case. The next one is a quote from the story of the Verwandlung from Kafka. Als Gregor Samsa eines Morgens erwachte, fand sich zu einem ungeheuren Ungeziefer verwandelt. When Gregor Samsa awoke one morning, he found he had been turned into a monstrous bug. Eines Morgens is one morning. It's not a specific day that we're talking about, it's just one random day. Als Gregor Samsa eines Morgens erwachte, fand sich zu einem ungeheuren Ungeziefer verwandelt. Another use of the genitive case is genitive verbs. While these verbs are not common, they do exist, and it would be remiss if I did not mention them. These, of course, use the same thing as what the dative verbs did, which means that the object of these verbs is used with the genitive case. Here's a very, very short list of them. Sich enthalten, to refrain from or abstain. Sich bedienen, to make use of or employ. Sich gedenken, to think of or commemorate. And bedürfen, to be in need of. Here's an example of sich enthalten, to refrain from or abstain. Der Politiker enthält sich der Stimme. The politician abstains from voting. Der Politiker enthält sich der Stimme. Der Stimme is the object of this genitive verb, sich enthalten. So of course that is der Stimme instead of die Stimme, which would normally be for the nominative or accusative. Sich bedienen, to make use of. Bill Nye bedient sich des Wissens, uns zu begeistern. Bill Nye makes use of knowledge to inspire us. Bill Nye bedient sich des Wissens, uns zu begeistern. In this sentence, des Wissens is used in the genitive case because it's the thing that is being made use of. So again, we have to use the genitive case because sich bedienen requires that genitive case. Gedenken, to think of or commemorate. Die ganze Nation gedenkt des Jahrestags des Anschlags. The entire nation commemorates the anniversary of the attack. You'll notice here that we actually have two genitive things in a row. Des Jahrestags is the actual thing that is being commemorated, which is in the genitive case because of the verb gedenken. Des Anschlags is actually just the usual genitive case. This is actually here for the possessive. It is the anniversary of the attack. Des Anschlags is of the attack. Bedürfen, to be in need of. Sie bedarf nur eines Trostes. She is only in need of comfort or consolation. Sie bedarf nur eines Trostes. Eines Trostes is being used here in the genitive case because bedürfen requires us to use the genitive case with the object. Just like there are certain things that are constructed with the dative case, there are also certain things that we construct with the genitive case. For example, ist seines Erfolgs gewiss. He is confident of his success. ist seines Erfolgs gewiss. Ich bin mir seines Verrats bewusst. I am aware of his betrayal. Ich bin mir seines Verrats bewusst. Dieser Mann ist des Mordes schuldig. This man is guilty of the murder. Dieser Mann ist des Mordes schuldig. In addition to just using it with certain adjectives, you can also use this with certain noun phrases, such as first class. Mein Schwiegervater fliegt immer erster Klasse. My father-in-law always flies first class. Mein Schwiegervater fliegt immer erster Klasse. Seine Tochter ist für heute guter Laune. His daughter is in a good mood today. Seine Tochter ist heute guter Laune. Wir sind festen Glaubens, dass wir gewinnen werden. We are of firm faith that we will win. Wir sind festen Glaubens, dass wir gewinnen werden.
Are you getting the hang of the German case system? My book dives even deeper with tons of examples and exercises to help you nail down each concept. Don't miss out, search for Mastering the German Case System and take your German to the next level.
Now that we have the basics of the case system out of the way and we know what all of the cases are and what they're generally used for, we can get into some details that have to go along with all of this. There's such a thing in German known as weak nouns. They are all masculine nouns. They generally end with an E, but not all of them, and these words are words that you've seen throughout this presentation so far, but they are words that require an N or EN whenever that word is used in a case that is not nominative. So basically, these nouns are so weak that whenever they don't get their way and they don't get to be the subject of the sentence, they throw a little fit, and the fit that they throw shows up in the form of having an N or an EN at the end of the noun. This includes a ton of nouns, but the base list that you should probably familiarize yourself with is on screen now. Things like der Neffe, which is the nephew. This ends with an E, but is a masculine noun. To make this into the accusative case, we would say den Neffen for nephew. Name is one that you've seen before. It becomes den Namen, which is the name, but accusative. So if it's the direct object, as in, I like your name, you would say deinen Namen in that example sentence. This also goes for words like held. While this is a masculine noun that does not end with an E, this one does take an EN because it falls into the category of weak nouns. So instead of der Held, we now have in the accusative case, den Helden. This also goes for things like cliff, which is der Fels, changing to den Felsen. And the one that probably causes me the most trouble is der Herr, which changes to den Herrn. It's also the reason that lots of people in the comments of my videos have shown throughout the years that it should be learn German with Herrn antrim rather than Herr antrim. What I point out to them is that the channel name is in the English language, and English does not care about the German traditions. It just cares that Herr means Mr. in German, and we just assume that Herr is always Herr, no matter what happens. Whenever it's actually written in German, so if you go to YouTube and you switch your whole setup into German, you'll notice that the German version of my YouTube channel is actually Deutsch lernen mit Herrn antrim. And that is because, of course, Herr is on the list of weak nouns, which changes to den Herrn in the accusative, dem Herrn in the dative, and des Herrn in the genitive. There's also a list of other words that are on here, but these are the ones that you should probably at least just take a screenshot of this and memorize this while you're at it. There are some general rules that you can follow with this. First of all, they are generally masculine nouns that end with E. They are all masculine nouns, by the way. There's no exception to that part of it. They are also usually people or animals, such as nephew or boy or Frenchman or hare or monkey. All of those are the list there in the first part. Der Neffe, der Junge, der Franzose, der Hase, der Affe. In the accusative case, that would become den Neffen, den Jungen, den Franzosen, den Hasen, and den Affen. There are also lots of nouns that have Latin or Greek endings that would also fall into this category. This would include things like Assistent, which ends in ENT. That is, Assistent, in the accusative case, den Assistenten. Ant, which is very similar, such as Emigrant. Emigranten would be the accusative. Things that end in ist, such as Kapitalist. Kapitalisten for the accusative form. Things that end in at, such as Diplomat. Diplomaten would be the accusative form. Things that end in aut, such as Astronaut, which would of course be Astronauten in the accusative. And words that end in ad, which includes things such as Kamerad, which would then of course change to Kameraden. There are a few single-syllable masculine nouns that also fall into this category, and that's where we end up with things like Bär, den Bären, Christ, den Christen, Mensch, den Menschen, Prinz, den Prinzen, Narr, den Narren. Here are a few examples of how this might actually show up in a sentence. Sein Name ist cool. His name is cool. Ich mag seinen Namen. I like his name. You'll notice that the word itself did not change. We're still saying the word name, and we're still saying his name in this sentence. But because the first one is highlighted in red, we know that it is the subject of the sentence, and so we just say sein Name. That's in the nominative case for a masculine noun. So sein does not get an ending, and Name stays Name. In the accusative one, the second sentence here, seinen Namen is used, and that's because this is, again, a masculine noun in the accusative case. It's the direct object, the thing that I like in this sentence. So we, of course, have to use seinen. Seinen as the accusative form of the possessive his. The word Name now changes to be Namen, which of course has an N at the end of it because it is no longer the subject. Der Bär ist in dem Wald. The bear is in the forest. Der Bär is normal. That's the subject of the sentence. We don't have to add an en. In the second example, we do. Der Jäger schießt den Bären. The hunter shoots the bear. Den Bären instead of der Bär, because of course it's the thing being shot, so den Bären. Der Elefant begrüßt den Löwen. The elephant greets the lion. The lion is the one being greeted in this sentence, so of course it is den for the accusative case, and Löwen, which has an extra N at the end of it because it is in the accusative case. Der Löwe beißt den Elefanten. You'll notice now we have der Löwe, which does not have the N at the end of it because it's the subject of the sentence, but Elefanten now has en at the end of it because it is the direct object, so den Elefanten. Of course, this doesn't only happen with the accusative case, it also happens with the dative and genitive cases as well. For example, Ich gehe heute mit meinem Neffen ins Kino. I am going to the movie theater with my nephew today. Nephew is normally der Neffe, but in the dative case, because of the preposition mit, we say mit meinem Neffen. Außer dem Namen haben wir nichts gemeinsam. Besides the name, we have nothing in common. Außer is another dative preposition, which we'll get to here in a little bit, but it requires the dative case, which is why we say dem Namen. Dem Namen. Der Zoowärter gibt dem Löwen das Steak. The zookeeper gives the lion the steak. Dem Löwen is the indirect object. It's the one receiving the steak. That makes it dative. And in the dative case, Löwe changes to Löwen. Du solltest Deutsch mit einem Deutschen üben. You should practice German with a German. In this sentence, the word German is der Deutsche, but we changed it to mit einem Deutschen in the dative case because we wanted to say with a German, and the preposition mit requires the dative object. So, mit einem Deutschen. Quick side note here, this is actually because Deutsch is being used as an adjective. If you were to write out the whole thing, it would be der deutsche Mann, and so when we get to the dative case, we say mit dem deutschen Mann, and of course we would have that en at the end of it. It's kind of a coincidence that it falls into the category of weak nouns, but what really is happening here is we have a masculine noun that has an adjective as the noun itself. We'll get to adjectives and their endings here in this course as well, so if you don't understand that quite yet, just hang on a little while and you'll get to it soon. Here are some examples in the genitive case. Der Hund meines Neffen heißt Struppi. My nephew's dog is called Struppi. Notice here that we do not have an S at the end of Neffe. Neffe is now going to use an N for the genitive case, and so we bypass the rule that requires us to have an S. This rule is not always bypassed, however, which you can see in the next example. Die Bekanntheit seines Namens ist seine Superkraft. The prominence of his name is his superpower. Again, seines Namens, this one requires both an N and an S. If you're ever unsure, go to duden.de, and whenever you're there, just search out whatever noun it is that you're looking for, and it will have a list of the declined forms, so the different forms that you use in the different cases for any of these nouns that you're unsure of. Der echte Name des Helden ist nicht bekannt. The real name of the hero is not known. Again, we do not have an S at the end because we're still bypassing that extra rule. Der Rüssel des Elefanten ist sehr lang. The trunk of the elephant is very long. Again, no S on this one because this noun doesn't allow for it. I've mentioned pronouns a few times throughout this course already, and I've shown you a bunch of example sentences using them. In fact, I had a whole side note dedicated to them whenever we were talking about the possessive articles. But now we're actually going to talk about what pronouns are and how to use them. We're going to start with personal pronouns. Personal pronouns are basically the ones that you think of when you hear someone say pronoun. It's the ones like I, you, he, she, it, we, they, you, all of those things. Those are all personal pronouns. Sometimes these things are the same between nominative and accusative, such as sie, which remains sie in the nominative and accusative cases. But every single one of them will change between the nominative and the dative. So for instance, sie in the nominative becomes ia in the dative. Let's compare them in the chart on the next page. This is a full chart of the personal pronouns. So in the nominative case, when we want to say I am doing something, you would say ich mache etwas. If, however, this I is being used as the direct object, it has to become me in English, which in German changes to mich. Ich, mich. If it happens to be the indirect object, we then use mir. Ich, mich, mir. Ich kaufe das. I am buying that. Kennst du mich? Do you know me? That gives us the direct object version. Or hilf mir. Help me. This time we're using the dative case because we used a dative verb such as helfen. Hilf mir, help me. Other pronouns that change between each case would be du, changing to dich in the accusative, and dir in the dative. Changes to ihn and then ihm in the dative. Sie and s don't change between nominative and accusative, but sie becomes ihr in the dative, and s becomes ihm. The cool part about sie, and s is that if you take the last letter of each of these words for the pronoun, it will be the same as the der words chart that I've been showing you all along. So rese for the nominative case would be sie, s, and then the plural z on the other side here, which means they. In the accusative case, we have nese. So again, ihn, sie, es, sie. In the dative case, we have dem, der, dem, den, or ihm, ihr, ihm, ihnen. For the plural side of things, we have wir, which changes to uns in both accusative and dative, and ihr, which changes to euch for both accusative and dative. Wir, of course, meaning we, uns being us, and ihr being the you plural informal, which then changes to, again, still just you plural informal for both accusative and dative, just a different way of spelling it and saying it. Sie does not change no matter if it means she or if it means you or they, so we still have sie in the accusative case, but in the dative case for the plural ones, so the one that means they or them, and the one that means you formal, both change to ihnen. Just don't forget to capitalize the one that means you. Here are some examples of the nominative case pronouns. Ich bin ein Mann. I am a man. Ich is the subject of the sentence, which is I. Bist du eine Lehrerin? Are you a teacher? Du is the subject of that sentence, so we use the pronoun du as you rather than using dich or dir. Der nette Mann ist hübsch. Ist mein Sohn. The nice man is handsome. He is my son. Is referring back to the man, which is a masculine noun, so we use the masculine pronoun. Don't forget that from what I told you at the very beginning of this course, that also refers to any masculine noun, whether that's something that has an intrinsic gender or not. So for instance, we could say when referring to a table, because a table is masculine in German. Of course, the table would not be your son. Die kluge Frau ist da drüben. Sie ist meine Tochter. The smart woman is over there. She is my daughter. Again, the pronoun sie has to refer back to a feminine noun, so we're using here sie to refer back to die kluge Frau. Again, same thing as what we had for masculine nouns. If you're using a feminine noun that does not have an intrinsic gender, we still use the pronoun sie to refer to that thing, such as a door, which is feminine, it's die Tür. You would say, sie ist braun, she is brown, or it is brown, but a feminine form. Das große Pferd ist braun, es steht da. The large horse is brown, it stands there. Again, we're using a neuter noun this time, so we do say es instead of sie or er. This goes for animate objects such as this horse, but it can also be used with things like a window, which is das Fenster. You would say es for that window as well. Wir fahren in die Stadt. We are driving into the city. Wir fahren in die Stadt. We are the ones driving, which gives us the nominative pronoun wir. Bleibt ihr heute zu Hause? Are you staying at home today? Ihr is our subject, which of course has to be conjugated with the T at the end of the verb. This, by the way, is the plural you in the informal way. It's basically like having multiple do's. So if you would say do to one person in this conversation, you would say ihr to multiple people in the same conversation. Das sind meine Kinder. Sie sind müde. These are my children. They are tired. Sie in this one is referring back to meine Kinder, which are my children. This is a plural noun, so regardless of the fact that it's das Kind for the singular, we still use the plural pronoun sie to mean they. Sie sind müde. Wie heißen Sie? How are you called? What is your name? Sie in this sentence is you, and this is the one we use for the formal version. This could be a singular person, or it could be multiple people to whom we are speaking. For the accusative case, I use the same basic sentence over and over again so that I can show you the juxtaposition of the nominative case and the accusative case. Du brauchst mich. You need me. Me in this sentence is the direct object, the thing being needed, so instead of saying ich, we say mich for the accusative. Ich brauche dich. I need you. You are the direct object, so rather than saying du, we say dich. Sie braucht ihn. She needs him. Him in this sentence is the direct object, which gives us ihn instead of er. Er braucht sie. He needs her. This one relies a little bit on word order and a little bit on the fact that er is always the subject. Otherwise it becomes ihn or ihm. But for this one, we can tell that he is the one that needs something, and the something he needs is her or she, sie. Wir brauchen es. We need it. Es in this sentence is referring to a neuter noun, whatever that noun may be, and it is the direct object of the sentence. Again, we're relying a little bit on the word order, but also on the fact that wir is always the subject, otherwise it becomes uns. Wir brauchen euch. We need you. In this sentence, we used euch to refer to multiple people to whom we would use the do form. So instead of saying ihr for the nominative case version, we used euch as the direct object. Ihr braucht uns. You need us. This time we used ihr as the subject and uns as the direct object. So instead of saying we now say us. Sie brauchen sie. They need you. We can tell that this means they need you because sie is capitalized in the second half of the sentence. Otherwise, we would not really know which sie we're using. Sie brauchen sie. They need you. Ich brauche sie. I need them. This one only tells us that it's them because of context. Honestly, if we didn't have me telling you that it means them, it could mean I need her. Ich brauche sie. It would be the same sentence. But I'm telling you it means them, so it means them. Now let's take a look at the dative case examples. Der Arzt gibt dem Patienten den Zettel. The doctor gives the patient the slip of paper. The patient is the indirect object, so instead of der Patient, we now have dem Patienten. This is also a weak noun. If you switch out dem Patienten with a pronoun, the sentence would become Er gibt ihm den Zettel. He gives him the slip of paper. Die Schülerin sagt der Lehrerin die Antwort. The student tells the teacher the answer. Der Lehrerin is the indirect object here, it's the one receiving the answer. If we switch that out for a pronoun, you would end up with Die Schülerin sagt ihr die Antwort. The student tells her the answer. Die Schülerin sagt ihr die Antwort. ihr is a pronoun for the dative case that is used for feminine nouns, such as die Lehrerin. Das Mädchen gibt dem Pferd das Heu. The girl gives the horse the hay. The horse is receiving the hay, which makes it the indirect object and therefore dative. Das Mädchen gibt es ihm. The girl gives it. You'll notice I switched the green and the blue this time. That comes up for a rule that I'm about to teach you. But basically, when the accusative one is a pronoun, the pronoun goes first before you will have the dative one. Das Mädchen gibt es ihm. Accusative first, dative second. This does not change the word order of them in the English language, however. The girl gives it has to have the first it refer to the horse and the second it refer to the hay. Die Eltern zeigen den Kindern die Spielzeuge. The parents show the children the toys. Die Eltern zeigen sie ihnen. The parents show them. Again, I switched the word order so that the green one goes first. That would be the accusative one, the direct object, the pronoun that is referring to die Spielzeuge, or the toys. The dative one goes second, ihnen, which is referring to the plural children, den Kindern. Again, when the accusative one is a pronoun, we put that first before we have the dative one. The word order for this is a relatively stringent rule, however you can be a little bit flexible and you can move these words around to put more emphasis on something. The closer it is to the beginning of the sentence, in this case the closer it is to the verb, that means that we're putting more emphasis on that. So while stylistically you could change the word order a little bit from what I'm saying here, it technically has to be indirect object first and the direct object second if either no pronouns are present, so neither the indirect object nor the direct object are pronouns, or the indirect object is a pronoun but the direct object is not. If, however, the direct object is a pronoun, no matter if that means that only the direct object is a pronoun or both of the objects are pronouns, it does not matter which one that is. The direct object has to go first because the direct object is a pronoun. Here are some examples of what I mean. In the first two examples, the direct object is not a pronoun, which means the indirect object goes first, meaning that the dative one is before the accusative one. Die Eltern zeigen den Kindern die Spielzeuge. The parents show the children the toys. This is the same example I gave earlier. Die Eltern zeigen ihnen die Spielzeuge. Again, we have the ihnen, which is the them. This is used as the indirect object, and it is the dative thing that goes before the accusative one. If the direct object is a pronoun, for instance the second two examples here, you have to use the direct object first and then the dative one. Die Eltern zeigen sie den Kindern. The parents show the children them. Sie in this sentence is referring back to die Spielzeuge, but because it's a pronoun and it's the accusative object, we have to put that before the dative object. The same thing is true even if we remove both objects and put both of them as pronouns. Die Eltern zeigen sie ihnen. The parents show them. Again, in the English, the first them has to refer to the children, whereas the second them has to refer to the Spielzeuge, or the toys. In German, sie is the accusative pronoun, and it goes before the dative one because that's the rule.
Loving the video content so far? My book offers detailed explanations, practice exercises, and extra resources to boost your German learning. It is the key to mastering the German case system. Find it on Amazon or any bookstore near you.
Our next topic is relatively in the same vein because now we are talking about question words, and in case you didn't know it, question words are technically a kind of pronoun. Technically they are called interrogative pronouns. Basically it means that they are replacing something within the sentence and they are used to ask questions. That's all that really means. The thing that they're replacing in this is actually just the specific information that we do not know. Sometimes these question words require us to understand the German case system, which is why they are included in this course. If the question word is not included in this course, it means that the case system is irrelevant for that particular question word. If you want to know literally every question word there is to know, I made a video for that a few years ago, which is linked in the description. For the nominative case, there are a couple of question words that you can use. If we're asking about a person that is the subject of the sentence, we have to use the question word wer. Wer means who in English. You can use it in sentences like these. Wer ist das? Who is that? Das ist mein Mann. That is my husband. My husband is the subject of the sentence, and when we're answering the question, we use mein Mann in the nominative case because of that. The question word that we used was wer, which is inquiring about that person over there. Who is that? Wer ist das? Since the question and the answer are in the nominative case, we know that we have to be using the question word wer to ask about that person. Wer lädt dich ein? Who is inviting you? Dein Mann lädt mich ein. Your husband is inviting me. In this sentence, we again have wer as our question word because we're asking about the subject. Who is inviting you in this sentence? We want to know that person that is doing the action of the sentence. We're asking about the subject, so we have to use wer as our question word. Quick side note here, the verb einladen generally carries with it the idea that the person that you're talking about is paying for whatever the activity is. So for example, dein Mann lädt mich ins Kino ein would mean your husband is inviting me to the movies, as in your husband is paying for the movie tickets that we are both going to see. And while grammatically speaking that is all that this sentence implies, in social implications it probably implies that you are getting divorced or you're at least on the rocks. Another question word that we can use in the nominative case is the question word was. Was means what in English. Was ist das? What is that? This sentence uses the exact same phrasing that we did before, except this time we know we're not talking about a person because we're asking about a what, and a what cannot be a who. Was macht dieses Geräusch? What is making that sound? There is something that is making a sound, and we don't know what that thing is, and therefore we say, was macht dieses Geräusch? We're asking about the subject, so whenever we answer the question with like the lion or something, you would say der Löwe, which would be in the nominative case, because it's the subject of the sentence about which we are inquiring. While wer is exclusively used with the nominative case, was can actually be used with either the nominative or the accusative case. It's also important to note that wer refers to only people, or in rare cases personified animals, while was always refers to an object that is not a person. In the accusative case, instead of using wer, we use wen. Wen is basically whom, but for the accusative case. The problem I usually encounter whenever I'm teaching this to my high school students is that no one knows what whom is used for anymore. So let me break it down like this. If you can answer the question with he as your answer, you need the question word who in English. If the pronoun that you're using in English ends with an M instead, i.e. him, then you need to have your question word end with an M as well, which means that the English word should be whom. The same thing is true whenever we get to the German version, where we have wer, which is who, and wen, which is whom. Wer would be answered with er, and wen would be answered with ihn, I-H-N. So again, the last letter of the question word is going to match the last letter of the answer. Let's take a look at these question words in action. Wer liebt dich? Who loves you? Wer lädt dich ein? Who is inviting you? In both of these, you are being verbed or being acted upon, which makes you the direct object, but wer is the subject. Who is the one doing something? Wen lädst du ein? Whom are you inviting? Wen liebst du? Whom do you love? In both of these, you are the one that is doing something. You are inviting, and you are loving. The whom that we are asking about is the direct object of the sentence, which makes us use wen instead of using wer. If you were to switch these around as answers to the questions, you would say, liebt mich, he loves me. Or you would say, ich lade ihn ein, I am inviting him. So in the top one, wer liebt dich, liebt mich. Has an R at the end of it in the same way that wer does. When answering the bottom ones, we have to use ihn instead. So, wen lädst du ein? Ich lade ihn ein. As I mentioned before, the question word was can either be used in the nominative case or it can be used in the accusative case. Let's take a look at some examples of both. Was ist das? What is that? Was frisst Hausaufgaben? What eats homework? If you want to get a new pet and you want to make sure that that new pet is going to be able to eat your homework, of course you're going to have to ask what kind of an animal eats homework. Was frisst Hausaufgaben? In this sentence and in the previous one, was ist das, both of them are using was as the subject of the sentence, because the homework is not eating anything, and sein, or in this case ist, cannot possibly have a direct object, which I mentioned way back when we were still talking about predicate nominatives. In the accusative case examples we have, was hast du in der Tasche? What do you have in the bag? Was isst du heute? What are you eating today? In the first one, du is the subject, which tells us that you have something. The something that you have is the thing that we're asking about, which is was, or what. In the second one, you are eating something, and the thing that you're eating is what we are inquiring about, which gives us the question word was. Was isst du heute? What are you eating today? Both of them are going to be answered with an accusative answer, so you could say, Ich habe einen Kuli. I have a pen. Or, ich esse einen Apfel. I am eating an apple. Both of them are being answered with an accusative object, and therefore we have to use was in the accusative case here. Lucky for everyone involved, was does not change between the nominative and accusative cases like wer and wen did. Wer is only used for the nominative case, wen is only used for the accusative case, but was can be used for either or. There is a third question word that we use for people, and that is wem. Wem is basically the dative version of wer and wen. Wer is nominative, meaning who. Wen is accusative and means whom. And there is a second whom, which is wem, and that one is used for the dative case. You can use this as an object of a preposition, or you can use this as the object of a dative verb, or you can use it as an indirect object. But all of this is to say we're asking about a person that is going to be used in the dative case when we answer the question. Wem kaufst du es? For whom are you buying it? Ich kaufe das deiner Mutter. I am buying that for your mother. Deiner Mutter would be in the dative case there because your mom is the indirect object. Your mom's an indirect object. Wem schreibst du einen Brief? Whom are you writing a letter? Wem schreibst du einen Brief? Du is the subject there. You are writing something. That something you're writing is a letter, which is einen Brief, which is why that's in the accusative case there. Wem is the one that is receiving the einen Brief that we are schreiben. Wem schreibst du einen Brief? Whom are you writing a letter? In the next one, the verb helfen is a dative verb, so the object of the dative verb is, of course, dative. Wem hilfst du? Whom are you helping? Wem hilfst du? In the last one, we have a dative preposition, which is mit. Mit wem arbeitest du? With whom do you work? Mit wem arbeitest du? Again, we use the dative case question word because we used a dative preposition, mit. Mit wem? With whom? Since we can also ask about people using the genitive case, we have to, of course, have a fourth question word for people. Wer for nominative, wen for accusative, wem for the dative, and now we have wessen for the genitive case. Wessen basically translates as the English word whose. It's exclusively used in front of a noun, so you would have to say, whose something is that, or whose whatever is that. For example, wessen Hemd ist das? Whose shirt is that? Das ist das Hemd meines Bruders. That is the shirt of my brother, or that's my brother's shirt. Wessen is used here to show us to whom the shirt belongs, but we don't know to whom it belongs, and therefore we have to ask, whose shirt? Wessen Hemd. When we answer the question, we use the genitive case in place of where wessen used to be, right next to Hemd. Das ist das Hemd meines Bruders. Meines Bruders is in the genitive case. Wessen Buch liest du? Whose book are you reading? Ich lese F. Scott Fitzgerald's Buch. I am reading F. Scott Fitzgerald's book. Wessen is used here to ask about the person to whom the book belongs, and therefore we say wessen Buch, whose book. When we answer the question, we use Fitzgerald with an S at the end of it to indicate the genitive case. Keeping with the topic of pronouns, we're going to continue on to the demonstrative pronouns and the relative pronouns. The only difference between these two is actually how you use them. The words themselves are the same for demonstrative and relative pronouns in German, so if you get confused with the terminology here, it basically just turns out to be that in English, or those, or these, something along those lines. Those words are, of course, the words that we're talking about in this part of the lessons. If you look at this chart, it looks exactly like the der words chart with 5 very important exceptions. The dative plural, instead of being den, is now denen, and all of the genitive ones are now a bit weirder. So instead of saying des for both masculine and neuter nouns, we now say dessen. And for the feminine and the plural, instead of saying der, we now say deren. To really understand how these things are used, we have to see some examples. Demonstrative pronouns are used in their own separate sentences and not in a separate clause that is part of a main sentence. So in other words, a demonstrative pronoun is going to be at the beginning of its own sentence, whereas a relative pronoun is going to be separated off by a comma and then the relative pronoun followed by the rest of a clause called a relative clause. Here are some examples of demonstrative pronouns in the nominative case. Siehst du den Tisch da drüben? Der ist sehr teuer. Do you see the table over there? It is very expensive. Der in this sentence is actually being used as a demonstrative pronoun to refer back to den Tisch. It's used in the nominative case because that's how it is in the sentence. If you wanted to, you could say der Tisch ist sehr teuer, but we just mentioned which table we're talking about, so instead of doing that, we used a pronoun. We could have said ist sehr teuer if we wanted to, talking about, again, the table. But in this case, I chose to use der to draw more attention to it. Ich mag diese Hose. Die ist nicht zu eng. I like these jeans. They are not too tight. First little thing I should probably mention is that Hose is a singular noun, while the English word jeans is plural. That being said, whenever you use a pronoun instead, you would say sie, normally speaking, giving us it for a feminine noun. But in this case, we're going to use the demonstrative pronoun die instead. Die ist nicht zu eng. They are not too tight. We're saying those ones or these are not too tight. Sucht das Messer. Das ist auf dem Tisch. He is looking for the knife. It is on the table. Sucht das Messer. Das Messer is the neuter noun that we're referring to here, and we use das as a pronoun to refer back to it. Wir mögen diese Pfirsiche. Die sind lecker. We like these peaches. They are delicious. Pfirsiche are plural in this sentence, so we use die as the pronoun for them. We could have, of course, used sie, meaning they, but instead we decided to say those or these ones are very delicious. Die sind lecker. For all of these examples, it's just a stylistic choice between using or der, sie or die, es or das, or sie and die again. All of this is just a stylistic choice, and you can actually say either one whichever way you want. This happens to be a little bit more conversational and sounds a little bit more colloquial rather than just having the stiff and stilted version, which has all of the pronouns that we've been talking about. These examples all use relative pronouns. Relative pronouns are used within a relative clause. They are separated off by a comma, and then at the end of the sentence you will find the conjugated verb. So, der da drüben steht. Steht is at the end of the sentence because it's a relative clause. If you want to learn more about the word order that's going on here, you can check out a link down in the description where I talk about relative pronouns for a really long time, and I explain all of the intricacies of the wordplay that has to be used here in order for the word order to work out properly. Until then, let's get into these examples. Siehst du den Tisch, der da drüben steht? Do you see the table that is standing over there? That, in this sentence, is referring back to the table in the same way that it was on the previous slide. This time, however, we're using it in the same sentence. So we're still talking about, do you see the table? Then we're also using the clause, the table is over there, or the table is standing over there. So we say, der da drüben steht. Siehst du den Tisch, der da drüben steht? Ich mag die Hose, die in diesem Bild sind. I like the jeans that are in this picture. Again, we're using ich mag die Hose, which is I like the jeans, but then the pronoun that we use here is used with a relative clause, and so we say that are in this picture. the jeans that we're talking about here. Sucht das Messer, das auf dem Tisch ist. He is searching for the knife that is on the table. Again, we're using a relative clause, das referring back to das Messer. Sucht das Messer, das auf dem Tisch ist. Wir mögen diese Pfirsiche, die vom Bauern kommen. We like these peaches that are coming from the farmer. Pfirsiche is still plural, and we're still using it as the subject of the secondary clause, which is why it's highlighted in red. Die is the subject here. You can also use these relative pronouns when they are not the subject of the sentence. So for example, Ich sehe denselben Film, den dieser Mann sieht. I am watching the same film that this man is watching. In this sentence, dieser Mann is the subject of the secondary clause, but den is the word that we're using as the direct object. This man sees that same film that we were talking about. So dieser Mann sieht denselben Film. This man is seeing the same film. Don't get it twisted and think that because I used denselben Film in the accusative case in the first clause, that's the reason it's being used in the accusative case in the second clause. That is not the case, which you can see very clearly in the previous example sentences where I use something in the accusative case in the first clause and in the nominative case in the second clause. Ich weiß die Antwort, die diese Frau weiß. I know the answer that this woman knows. In this case, die Frau is of course the subject, and the thing that she knows is die, which is die Antwort, but we're using it as a pronoun here. I know the answer that this woman knows. Ich weiß die Antwort, die diese Frau weiß. Dieses Mädchen, das ich mag, lässt dieses Buch zu Hause. This girl that I like leaves this book at home. Dieses Mädchen is the subject of the main clause, which if you remove the relative clause out of the sentence entirely, you end up with just the main clause. Dieses Mädchen lässt dieses Buch zu Hause. This girl leaves this book at home, which I used as an example sentence earlier in this course. Das ich mag is referring back to dieses Mädchen. It's just a way of describing the girl within the sentence. So, the girl that I like, dieses Mädchen, das ich mag. Die Pfirsiche, die ich gekauft habe, kommen vom Bauern. These peaches that I bought come from the farmer. Diese Pfirsiche is the subject of this clause again. It's the subject of the main sentence. So, diese Pfirsiche kommen vom Bauern would be a full sentence. These peaches come from the farmer. But we want to describe the peaches a little bit more, specifically the ones that I bought, and therefore, die ich gekauft habe. Die Pfirsiche, die ich gekauft habe, kommen vom Bauern. For some dative examples, let's get a little bit more complicated. Mein Bruder, dem ich gestern eine E-Mail geschickt habe, hat meine E-Mail noch nicht beantwortet. My brother, whom I sent an email yesterday, has not answered my email. In this sentence, the main sentence just says, Mein Bruder hat meine E-Mail noch nicht beantwortet. My brother has not yet answered my email. We want to describe which brother we're talking about, and in that we use this extra clause, dem ich gestern eine E-Mail geschickt habe, whom I sent an email yesterday. You could of course just restate this relative clause as its own sentence and remove all of this weirdness that's happening here. You could just say, Ich habe meinem Bruder gestern eine E-Mail geschickt, which is, I sent my brother an email yesterday. Then you could follow it up with another sentence that just says, Mein Bruder hat meine E-Mail noch nicht beantwortet, which is, my brother has not answered my email yet. But if we want to be more efficient, we can put these two things together and say it like I did in this example. Mein Bruder, dem ich gestern eine E-Mail geschickt habe, hat meine E-Mail noch nicht beantwortet. My brother, whom I sent an email yesterday, has not answered my email. Trifft morgen die Frau, der sein Auto verkauft. Tomorrow he is meeting the woman to whom he is selling his car. Again, you could just say, trifft morgen die Frau. He is meeting the woman tomorrow. But then we add extra information to describe the woman that he is meeting. Verkauft sein Auto. He is selling his car. And you would say, verkauft ihr, or verkauft der Frau sein Auto. He is selling the woman his car. Das Pferd, dem ich das Heu bringe, läuft zu mir rüber. The horse that I am bringing the hay is running to me. In this sentence, again, you could break it apart and have two full sentences. Das Pferd läuft zu mir rüber. The horse is running over to me. Dem ich das Heu bringe could be rearranged as Ich bringe dem Pferd das Heu. I am bringing the horse the hay. So we're of course using the horse here in the dative case, which is why it says dem at the beginning of this clause, dem ich das Heu bringe. Das Pferd, dem ich das Heu bringe, läuft zu mir rüber. Die Kinder, denen wir jeden Tag Essen kochen, möchten das Geschirr nicht spülen. The children that we cook food every day don't want to wash the dishes. In this sentence, again, we can break it apart into two halves. Die Kinder möchten das Geschirr nicht spülen. The children do not want to wash the dishes. Wir kochen den Kindern jeden Tag Essen. We cook the children food every day. The children are the indirect object of that secondary clause, which gives us the dative case and therefore denen for the plural version of the relative pronoun. Denen wir jeden Tag Essen kochen. Die Kinder, denen wir jeden Tag Essen kochen, möchten das Geschirr nicht spülen. For the genitive case, it gets a little weird. So here we have to show both possession and a pronoun at the same time. In this case, we say whose in English, but we say dessen or deren in the German version, based on the gender of the person to whom these things belong. For example, der Junge, dessen Haare blau sind, spielt den ganzen Tag Computerspiele. The boy, whose hair is blue, plays computer games the entire day. Dessen refers back to der Junge. It's a masculine noun, so we use the masculine pronoun to refer to it. We're using this in the genitive case because it is die Haare des Jungen, which is the hair of the boy. But we want to say whose hair rather than the boy's hair. Der Junge, dessen Haare blau sind, spielt den ganzen Tag Computerspiele. We do the same thing in the next example, but with a feminine noun. Die Frau, deren Mann gestorben ist, hat heute viel zu tun. The woman whose husband died has a lot to do today. Deren indicates to whom this man belonged, die Frau. Since it's a feminine person, die Frau, we have to use the feminine pronoun deren to say whose. Die Frau, deren Mann gestorben ist, hat heute viel zu tun. Der Polizist fährt mit dem Mädchen, dessen Eltern verschwunden sind, zur Polizeiwache. The police officer drives with the girl whose parents disappeared to the police station. In this one, we are referring back to das Mädchen. Das Mädchen is a neuter noun, so we use dessen as the possessive here. Der Polizist fährt mit dem Mädchen, dessen Eltern verschwunden sind, zur Polizeiwache. In the last one, we have a plural noun, die Kinder, which we are going to use with the possessive deren. Die Kinder, deren Schokolade schon gegessen wurde, wissen nicht, wer sie gegessen hat. The children, whose chocolate has already been eaten, do not know who ate it. There is one quick side note that I need to make about the relative pronouns. While it is true that you usually use relative pronouns with der words like I have been showing you, it is technically possible to use a question word instead. This is used whenever we don't know to whom we are referring with the particular pronoun. So if we know that it's a person and we know that it's in the nominative case, we can use the question word wer without having to identify that person's gender. So for instance, wer ein Stück Kuchen will, muss sich melden. Whoever wants a piece of cake has to raise their hand. In this sentence, we don't know to whom we are referring, so we have to use the question word wer. But we also aren't saying a question because we're saying this person, whoever they may be, has to raise their hand. Wen dieses Buch nicht interessiert, dem ist nicht zu helfen. Whomever this book does not interest, they are beyond help. In this sentence, dieses Buch is the subject of the clause, but wen is the whomever in the sentence. So this gives us the direct object. So the book is the one that is doing the interesting to someone, and the someone that is being interested is wen, whomever. You can do the same thing with the dative ones and the genitive ones. Wem Avengers nicht gefällt, der geht fast nie ins Kino. Whomever is not pleased by Avengers almost never goes to the movie theater. Since everything in the movie theater is now Avengers related, if you don't like Avengers, you probably don't go to the movie theater very often. In this sentence, wem is actually the object of the dative verb gefallen, and therefore has to be used in the dative case. Again, we don't know the person to whom we are referring, and therefore have to use a question word instead of a relative pronoun. Wessen Katze sie ist, bleibt ungewiss. Whose cat it is remains unknown. In this one, we're talking about a possessive thing, which means we have to use the genitive case, but we don't know to whom the cat actually belongs, and therefore we have to use a question word instead of a relative pronoun. Wessen Katze sie ist, bleibt ungewiss. Whose cat it is remains unknown.
Hey there, if you're enjoying this so far, you are going to love my book. It is filled with in-depth lessons, practical exercises, and downloadable extras to reinforce your German learning. Search Mastering the German Case System on Amazon or your favorite bookstore.
The next set of pronouns that we need to worry about are called reflexive pronouns. These are pronouns that are basically just a restating of the subject somewhere after the verb, but instead of just being like a predicate nominative, which we talked about earlier in this presentation, these kinds of pronouns are actually being acted upon by the subject, which happens to be the same as this object. It is both nominative and either accusative and dative. Basically, this means that your subject is both the subject and then it's restated later on as either the direct or indirect object. When this happens, we end up having this list of pronouns. For the most part, these are the same as they were for the normal pronouns or the personal pronouns. When they're used in the accusative case, the reflexive pronouns are mich, dich, sich, uns, euch, and sich. You'll notice here that instead of having sie, and s split up into their own little row, I have these set up as all just together, and then they all translate or change into sich. This happens because sie, and s are all the same type of pronoun here. So rather than saying changing to ihn, which would be he changing to him, we now have he, she, and it changing to himself, herself, and itself. All of them end up being sich in German as a reflexive. You'll also notice that the rest of the pronouns are normal. They are exactly as they are for the personal pronouns, which means that you don't actually have to care whether it is reflexive or not most of the time, unless you get up to the RZS form or the formal Z or the plural Z, where it becomes sich. Otherwise, you don't have to care that it is a reflexive pronoun as opposed to a personal pronoun. In the dative case, we follow the same pattern. Instead of mich in the accusative case, now in the dative case, we have mir. In the accusative case, we had dich instead of du, and in the dative case, we end up with dir. Both the accusative and dative forms for wir and ihr are the same for both forms, so we have uns and euch for both accusative and dative. Again, RZS and the two other Z's all use sich as their reflexive pronoun. Let's take a look at a few examples of how this works in action and start to figure out when do we use the accusative case and when do we use the dative. Here are a few examples of how you can use it as the accusative case. This basically means that there is not already an accusative object in the sentence. There is not already a direct object, and that means that we have to be using the reflexive pronoun as the direct object. For example, ich ärgere mich über mich. I am getting angry at myself, or I'm upsetting myself at myself. Here we have two michs in the sentence. We have mich as the reflexive pronoun right after the word ärgere, and then we have über mich, which tells us about what we are getting upset. We can ignore the über mich for right now, just so that we can concentrate on the one that's actually being used as a reflexive pronoun. Mich in the first one here just tells us who is being upset by the ich in the sentence. So it's basically, I am upsetting someone. The someone that is being upset is also me. And so I say, ich ärgere mich. I upset myself. Ich ärgere mich über mich. I upset myself about myself. Freust du dich auf das Wochenende? Are you looking forward to the weekend? This one's a bit tricky because in English we would never say, are you looking yourself forward to the weekend? But in German, when we say to look forward to something, we have to use a reflexive pronoun. So we end up with, freust du dich auf das Wochenende? Are you looking forward to the weekend? We're basically saying that this thing makes me happy, so we're looking forward to this thing. The thing that is being made happy is also you, so you are the one making yourself happy. Yourself is the one that is also being acted upon in the sentence, so we end up with both du and dich in the same sentence. Freust du dich auf das Wochenende? Konzentriert sich auf seine Hausaufgaben. He is concentrating on his homework. In German, you can't just concentrate. You have to concentrate something. In this case, we're concentrating the same thing as the subject, so he is the one concentrating, and he is also the one being concentrated, and therefore we have to have konzentriert sich. He is concentrating himself. Auf seine Hausaufgaben simply tells us on what he is concentrating. Wir interessieren uns für Fußball. We are interested in soccer. Or we are interesting ourselves in soccer. When you are interested in something, you have to say we are interesting ourselves in this sentence. Here we have wir as our subject, and the thing being interested is also wir, but since this is the direct object case, the accusative case, we use uns instead. Wir interessieren uns für Fußball. Entscheidet ihr euch für eine Universität? Are you deciding for a university? Again, you are deciding for yourself in this sentence, and so we're saying ihr entscheidet euch. You all are deciding for yourself. Since we're deciding for ourselves, we again use the subject and the object as the same person, but one is acting upon the other. So we have nominative case for the subject, ihr, and the accusative case for the direct object, euch. Entscheidet ihr euch für eine Universität? Sie verlieben sich. They are falling in love with each other. This one's a little bit more straightforward, because the people who are falling in love are the same people with whom they are falling in love. So we have Sie verlieben sich. They are falling in love with these other people being the same ones as the people who are falling in love. Sie verlieben sich. When you are saying a sentence that already has a direct object, usually this is a body part, but not always, then you have the dative case as the reflexive pronoun. For example, ich rasiere mich. I am shaving myself. Myself is the thing being shaved, and I am the one doing it, so we have ich rasiere mich. We use the accusative case here because I didn't identify which part of me that is being shaved, it just says me or myself, so obviously we're just saying here in general. If you make it a little bit more specific and say my legs, in German you would say ich rasiere mir die Beine. Ich rasiere mir die Beine. Here we have die Beine as the direct object. Ich is still our subject. Since I'm saying ich rasiere die Beine, that's I am shaving the legs. The person to whom the legs belong is me, and therefore we have here mir as this reflexive pronoun. It is very common nowadays to say ich rasiere meine Beine rather than using the reflexive form here, but officially it should be used with the reflexive as I have here. Ich rasiere mir die Beine. Just know that it also is acceptable to say ich rasiere meine Beine. Here are a few more examples using both the direct object and a reflexive pronoun in the dative case. Ich putze mir die Zähne. I am brushing my teeth. In German here, we have die Zähne is the thing being cleaned, and myself is the person to whom these teeth belong. So ich putze mir die Zähne. I am brushing my teeth. Wasch dir die Hände. Wash your hands. This one's a command, so we don't actually see the word do in the sentence, but the reflexive pronoun is the same person, so we do use here dir. Die Hände are the things being washed, which is used here in the accusative case. Kämmt sich die Haare. He is combing his hair. Here we have he and himself being combed, but the hair is technically the thing being combed, so the hair becomes the accusative object, the direct object, and the reflexive pronoun is used in the dative case, sich. Kämmt sich die Haare. Wir rasieren uns die Beine. We shave our legs. Wir rasieren uns die Beine. Die Beine are the things being shaved. Uns just tells us to whom they belong. So we are shaving the legs, that's accusative for the legs, and ourselves is the reflexive pronoun in the dative case, uns. Wir rasieren uns die Beine. Zieht euch die neuen T-shirts an. Put on your new T-shirts. Here we again implied the you form, so we don't actually see the word ihr in the sentence, but that is our subject. The reflexive here uses euch to show us that ihr is the subject, and we're using this reflexively. Die neuen T-shirts is our direct object, that is the thing being put on. The person to whom it is being put on is euch. Zieht euch die neuen T-shirts an. Sie können sich kein neues Auto leisten. They cannot afford a new car. A new car is the thing that is not being afforded. The person that cannot afford this is sie and sich, so we're using both of them here. This is basically like saying they can't afford a new car for themselves. Sie können sich kein neues Auto leisten. Occasionally, it is possible to use these same type of phrases without using it reflexively, and that's because the person that is doing something is not the same person that this is being done to. So, for instance, we can say, Ich putze meinem Sohn die Zähne. I am brushing my son's teeth. They're not my teeth, so whenever I'm saying that I'm brushing someone's teeth, we again use my son in the indirect object spot, but we use die Zähne in the same way that we did when it was reflexive. You could say, Ich putze mir die Zähne, I am brushing my teeth, or Ich putze meinem Sohn die Zähne, I am brushing my son's teeth. Wäscht seiner Tochter die Hände, he washes his daughter's hands. Here we have die Hände being washed, but they're not his own hands, they are his daughter's hands, so we say seiner Tochter. Again, if you use this reflexively, you would say wäscht sich die Hände. But we're using this with the daughter's hands, so we say seiner Tochter. Again, his daughter is in the dative case. Wäscht seiner Tochter die Hände. Kämmt dem Mann die Haare. He is combing the man's hair. The hair is the thing being combed, but it's not his own hair, so we say dem Mann instead. Kämmt dem Mann die Haare. Keep in mind that if this was reflexive, we would use sich, and while could be referring to a man, it's not the same man in this sentence because otherwise it would have to be reflexive. You can use these same types of phrases without having anything that is traditionally thought of as a reflexive verb, such as Sie haut ihm auf den Kopf. She hits him on the head. This one here uses ihm because it's the person that is receiving the klopf on the head. Klopft ihr auf die Schulter. He taps her on the shoulder. Ihr is the one receiving the tap on the shoulder, so we again use the dative object here. The next topic that we have on our list is adjective endings, and this one is a doozy in German. This usually is one of those topics that is done in German classes over several chapters. So, what I would recommend is pausing this video real quick, go grab yourself a drink, go to the bathroom, grab a snack, and then come back for this video. Alright, now that you're back from getting your snack and going to the restroom, let's go ahead and get into this beast of German adjectives. There are 3 categories of German adjective endings. These adjective endings are decided by what is in front of the adjective. So this could be a der word, so der, die, das, or dieser, jeder, manche, solche, any of those words. Or it could be an ein word, such as all of the ein words that you're thinking, ein, eine, einen, einem, any of those things. Or it could be a possessive, like mein, dein, sein. Those all count as ein words as well. Or it could be unpreceded, which doesn't mean that there's nothing in front of it, it just means that things that are in the der words category and things in the ein words category are not on that list. If this seems overwhelming, don't worry, most of the endings are either e or en, which makes it super easy for most of the time. The other ones will make sense in no time at all. This is a super overwhelming chart that I made, so if you want to take a screenshot or download that. There's also a link down in the description where you can download this thing for free, but this basically encompasses all of the adjective endings for all of the things. While it is a little overwhelming, once you kind of learn all of the processes that are involved here, this is kind of a good thing to just keep on the back of a folder somewhere so that you can use it whenever you need to come up with adjective endings in German. However, we're going to break it apart into several parts. First of all, we're talking about adjectives after der words. As I mentioned before, this could be der, die, das, like I have on the chart here, or it could also be things like dieser, jeder, manche, solche, welche, alle, all of those words. In the first example here, we have der dumme Mann, the dumb man. In the nominative case, most of the things have an e at the end of them, so we have der dumme Mann, die kluge Frau, das fleißige Mädchen. All 3 of those have the adjective ending with the e at the end. Der dumme Mann, die kluge Frau, das fleißige Mädchen. The only exception is in the plural form where we have die kleinen Kinder. This one has an en at the end of it, which, if you look down the rest of the list, all of the plurals have an en at the end. It goes die kleinen Kinder in the nominative, die kleinen Kinder in the accusative, den kleinen Kindern in the dative case, and der kleinen Kinder in the genitive. All of them have en at the end of it. So if there is a der word in front and it's plural, the adjective ending is automatically en. In the accusative case, the only thing that changes here is the masculine form, which goes from der to den, and therefore changes from an e to an en. So it is den dummen Mann. Also, if you look at the dative case and genitive case for masculine things, all of the rest of them are automatically en. So we have den dummen Mann for the accusative, dem dummen Mann for the dative, and des dummen Mannes for the genitive. In the accusative case, the feminine and neuter ones are exactly like they were in the nominative case. We have die kluge Frau, and das fleißige Mädchen, das fleißige Mädchen. Once we get into the dative case, every adjective ending uses en. Masculine, neuter, feminine, plural, doesn't matter. All of them will have an adjective ending of en in both the dative case and the genitive case. For the feminine things, both dative and genitive are der klugen Frau, der klugen Frau. The dative case for neuter things is dem fleißigen Mädchen, so en at the end there, and des fleißigen Mädchens, which again has an en at the end of the adjective. A much easier way to visualize all of this is to think of Oklahoma and Texas. If you're not familiar with geography in the United States, the picture off to the left here is Texas and Oklahoma. Sorry, it's not exactly the perfect two-scale model of the two states. However, what we do have is, up at the top, Oklahoma. Up there at the top left, we have Oklahoma's panhandle, and that is where we have Texas decided that they didn't want the top part of their state, because if they kept it, they would have had no slaves in that part of the state, and it would have been complicated. So rather than do that, they kept their slaves and just cut off the top of their hat. That left Oklahoma with a little extra stretch of land. Now, all of that is to say that the nominative masculine form is what's represented by that panhandle. The rest of the e's are over here in the feminine and neuter forms for both nominative and accusative. Everything else gets an n. What I'm getting out of all of this is Oklahoma is full of e's. That means the people in Oklahoma are your Oklahomies. And the people in Texas are full of Texans, therefore Texans. So we have en for all of the ones that would be in Texas. If you're wondering why the plural form has that extra little spot up there where my map on the left-hand side does not, it's not a perfect analogy, just roll with it. That part is Texas. Now, what counts as a der word? I've rattled off a list of these things a couple of times now, but here's the actual list. Der, die, das, den, dem, and des, that would be all of the der words that were just listed on the previous pages, and dieser, jeder, manche, solche, welche, and alle. There's also beide in there, but we usually don't talk about that one. Der kleine Mann, dieser kleine Mann, and jeder kleine Mann all indicate here that we have a der word in front, and the adjective ending takes an e for the nominative form. These all mean the short man, this short man, and every short man. Der kleine Mann, dieser kleine Mann, jeder kleine Mann. Let's take a look at some of these in example sentences. Dieser hübsche Arzt gibt jedem kranken Patienten solche weißen Zettel. This handsome doctor gives every sick patient this kind of white slips of paper. In the nominative case here, we have dieser hübsche Arzt. The doctor here is our subject. He's the one that's giving something. That makes it masculine and nominative, so we have an R at the end of the article and an E at the end of the adjective. The thing that he is giving are these white pieces of paper. Solche ends with an E because this is plural. Weißen ends with an en because again, this is plural. It has an article in front of it, so we put en at the end of the adjective. Patienten is the dative form of patient. Patient usually does not have an en at the end of it, but it's one of those weak nouns that I mentioned before. Jedem shows us here that we're using the dative case with this masculine noun. Kranken shows the adjective ending that follows that article, which is an en at the end of it. Dieser hübsche Arzt gibt jedem kranken Patienten solche weißen Zettel. Diese kluge Schülerin sagt dieser weisen Lehrerin jede richtige Antwort. This smart student tells this wise teacher every correct answer. Again, highlighted in red here, we have diese kluge Schülerin. This is in the nominative case because it's the one that's saying something. Diese has an E at the end of it, as does kluge, because this is feminine and in the nominative case. Antwort is also feminine, but in the accusative case. It's the thing being said. Since it's accusative and feminine, everything gets an E again, so we have jede richtige Antwort. E's all around for everyone. In the dative case, the feminine form becomes dieser. So the teacher who is receiving the answer, the indirect object of our sentence here, uses dieser weisen Lehrerin. We have an ER at the end of the article and an EN at the end of the adjective. Diese kluge Schülerin sagt dieser weisen Lehrerin jede richtige Antwort. Jedes fleißige Mädchen gibt jedem braunen Pferd dieses frische Heu. Every hard-working girl gives every brown horse this fresh hay. In this sentence we have neuter nouns, so we start off with jedes fleißige Mädchen in the nominative case. There is an S at the end of the article and an E at the end of the adjective. In the accusative case, the thing being given is hey, which is also neuter. This also gives us an S at the end of the article and an E at the end of the adjective. Dieses frische Heu. In the dative case, we have an M at the end of the article, jedem. And because we have the dative case, we also have an EN at the end of the adjective that follows. Jedem braunen Pferd. Jedes fleißige Mädchen gibt jedem braunen Pferd dieses frische Heu. Diese netten Eltern zeigen allen glücklichen Kindern diese neuen Spielzeuge. Diese netten Eltern are in the nominative case. They are the subject of the sentence. They're the ones that are showing something. The thing that is being shown is the direct object, diese neuen Spielzeuge. Both of them are plural, and they have an E at the end of the article and an EN at the end of the adjective. In the dative case, everything ends with N. That includes the article, the noun, and the adjective. Allen glücklichen Kindern. Diese netten Eltern zeigen allen glücklichen Kindern diese neuen Spielzeuge. Der Hund des alten Mannes ist braun. The dog of the old man is brown. In the genitive case, the masculine and neuter nouns use des as the article. There's also an es added to the end of single-syllable words. If it was a multisyllabic word, we would just use an s, but Mann only has one syllable. The adjective endings after any articles in the genitive case automatically becomes en, so des alten Mannes. Der Hund des alten Mannes ist braun. Die Katze der netten Frau ist grau. The cat of the nice lady is gray. The nice lady is the one that possesses the cat, which puts her in the genitive case. Genitive form for feminine nouns is der. The adjective that follows must be en, der netten Frau. Die Katze der netten Frau ist grau. Das Besteck des ganzen Publikums ist verschwunden. The cutlery of the entire audience has disappeared. Des ganzen Publikums is in the genitive case. That's because it is of the entire audience. We're showing possession here. Des is used for neuter nouns as well. We have an S at the end of the noun for the same reason. There is an en at the end of the adjective because that's what happens after an article in the genitive case. Das Besteck des ganzen Publikums ist verschwunden. Die Nächte der kleinen Städte sind mir sehr langweilig. The nights of the small city are very boring to me. Der kleinen Städte is plural and genitive. It is showing to whom the nights belong, the nights of the small city. Der is used for plural things in the genitive case. The adjective ending then has an en for the same reasons. Die Nächte der kleinen Städte sind mir sehr langweilig. Adjective endings after ein words are very similar to the ones after der words. Specifically, everything that was in Texas before still has an en at the end of the adjective. The only thing that changed is that Oklahoma became slightly more diverse. We now have ein dummer Mann with an er at the end of the adjective. Essentially what happens here is that we used to have der, which had an r at the end of the article. Because ein does not tell us whether it's masculine or neuter, we have to add an er at the end of the adjective to show us the gender of the noun. Ein dummer Mann, but ein fleißiges Mädchen. Notice how there's an s at the end of the adjective ending for neuter nouns. That's because das used to show us the gender, and now we have to show it through the adjective ending. Ein fleißiges Mädchen. Ein dummer Mann, a dumb man. Eine kluge Frau, a smart woman. Ein fleißiges Mädchen, a hard-working girl. Meine kleinen Kinder, my small children. Notice that I used mine, or a variation thereof, for all of the plural ones. That's because you can't say a followed by a plural noun, so instead I substituted in here a possessive as an example. Again, the only thing that is different between this chart and the previous chart is that the masculine nominative now has er at the end of the adjective, and neuter forms in both nominative and accusative now have es. Otherwise, the feminine forms still have an e, and all of the ones that used to have an en still have an en. So what counts as an ein word? I've already listed these a few times, but the main list is ein, eine, einen, einem, or eines, any of the forms that I just had on the previous page, or any of the possessive words such as mein, dein, sein, ihr, unser, and euer, or the negative ein word, which is basically just no or not a, and that is kein. Here's an example of how this might look. Ein kleiner Mann, a short man. Mein lieber Mann, my dear husband, and kein kleiner Mann, no short man, or not a short man. Here are a few examples in action. Mein jüngster Sohn bringt seinem faulen Opa einen neuen Golfschläger. My youngest son brings his lazy grandpa a new golf club. Mein jüngster Sohn is the subject of the sentence. There is no ending on the ein word here, which means that we have to have an ending on the adjective. This ending shows us the gender of the noun, which is an er because it's a masculine noun. In the accusative case, the ein word becomes einen for masculine things. So the accusative masculine form for the adjective also gains an n. An easy rule of thumb is, if the ein word or der word ends with an n, the adjective definitely will too. In the dative case, we have seinem faulen Opa, which is in the dative case and masculine, so seinem for masculine, and then the en for the adjective that follows. Mein jüngster Sohn bringt seinem faulen Opa einen neuen Golfschläger. Eine schöne Frau kauft einem hübschen Mann eine große Tasse Tee. A beautiful woman is buying a handsome man a large cup of tea. Eine schöne Frau is the subject of the sentence. That is nominative. Nominative feminine, everything gets an e, both the article and the adjective ending. Eine schöne Frau. Same thing happens in the accusative case. Eine große Tasse Tee. Everything gets an e at the end of it if it is feminine, either nominative or accusative. Eine große Tasse Tee. The man is in the dative case here, which gives us einem hübschen Mann. Einem for the masculine dative form, and the adjective that follows takes an en. Eine schöne Frau kauft einem hübschen Mann eine große Tasse Tee. Mein niedliches Kätzchen bringt einem sprachlosen Mädchen ein totes Mäuschen. My cute kitten brings a speechless girl a dead mouse. I'm assuming she's speechless because of the dead mouse. What do you even say to that? Mein niedliches Kätzchen. Mine does not have an ending on it because it is nominative and neuter. So we have to have an es at the end of the adjective to show us the gender of the noun in the nominative case. Mein niedliches Kätzchen. My cute kitten. The accusative thing also does not have an ending on the ein word. It just says ein. Therefore, we have to have an ending that tells us the gender on the adjective totes Mäuschen. A dead mouse. Ein totes Mäuschen. Einem sprachlosen Mädchen is in the dative case. Einem for neuter and dative, and the adjective takes en. Einem sprachlosen Mädchen. Mein niedliches Kätzchen bringt einem sprachlosen Mädchen ein totes Mäuschen. Meine kleinen Kinder kaufen ihren tollen Eltern keine coolen Geschenke. My small children don't buy their great parents any cool gifts. Meine kleinen Kinder shows us the nominative case for something plural, so we have an e at the end of the article and an en at the end of the adjective. The same thing happens in the accusative case. Keine coolen Geschenke. In the dative case, ihren tollen Eltern. Everything gets an n for plural and dative. Ihren tollen Eltern. Meine kleinen Kinder kaufen ihren tollen Eltern keine coolen Geschenke. Ein Hund eines alten Mannes ist weggelaufen. A dog of an old man ran away. Eines alten Mannes. In the genitive case, we have again an S at the end of the article and at the end of the noun. The en is added to the adjective. Eines alten Mannes. Ein Hund eines alten Mannes ist weggelaufen. Eine Katze einer netten Frau frisst mein Frühstück. A cat of a nice lady is eating my breakfast. Eine Katze einer netten Frau frisst mein Frühstück. Ein Zimmer eines verfluchten Hotels ist sehr preiswert. A room of a haunted hotel is very inexpensive. I bet. Eines verfluchten Hotels is in the genitive case. It shows to whom this room belongs, a haunted hotel. Eines verfluchten Hotels. Again, there is an S at the end of the article and at the end of the noun, but there is an en at the end of the adjective. Ein Zimmer eines verfluchten Hotels ist sehr preiswert. Die Blumenblätter meiner schönen Blumen sind rosa. The petals of my beautiful flowers are pink. Plural forms in the genitive case use an R at the end of the article and an en at the end of the adjective. Die Blumenblätter meiner schönen Blumen sind rosa. The last chart we have is for adjectives that do not have an article. This would be things like good cheese or fresh milk. This is not very common to use with singular nouns, but it is very common to use with plural nouns. That's because you can often use a plural noun without having an article, but it's much more rare that you can do that with a singular noun. Basically, all of this boils down to the same endings that you would have on the der words, but now put onto the adjectives. So instead of der Käse, we now have guter Käse. Instead of den Käse in the accusative, we have guten Käse. In the dative case, instead of dem Käse, we have gutem Käse. In the genitive case, it gets a little bit weird, however, and we now have guten Käses. While there is still an S at the end of the noun, there is not one at the end of the adjective. This basically happens because there is already an ending on Käse that shows us the gender and case. So we don't need to show this through the adjective ending like we do for the other cases. Feminine forms we now have either E or ER. Nominative, frische Milch. Accusative, frische Milch. Dative case, frischer Milch. Genitive case, frischer Milch. For neuter nouns, most things are ES, so we have nominative and accusative using grünes Obst. In the dative case, it becomes grünem Obst. Again, in the genitive case, we do not have that S at the end of the adjective because we already have an S at the end of the noun. So we say grünen Obstes. For the plural forms, we finally have one that just ends in an E for both nominative and accusative. Kleine Kinder, kleine Kinder. In the dative case, it becomes kleinen Kindern. And in the genitive case, kleiner Kinder. So what counts as non-preceded? Because we have all of the der words, we have all of the ein words, what could possibly be a non-article? This would include things like viel, etwas, viele, weniger, einige, and any number that you can ever think of. For example, viel frischer Käse, a lot of fresh cheese. Etwas frischer Käse, some fresh cheese. 5 kleine Stücke, 5 small pieces. Here are some more examples, but now in sentences. Frischer Käse riecht gut. Fresh cheese smells good. Normally we would say der Käse, the cheese, but instead we're saying fresh cheese, so the R that would be at the end of der is now at the end of frisch, so it is frischer Käse. Frischer Käse riecht gut. Ich mag frischen Käse. I like fresh cheese. Here we would have said den Käse. I like the cheese. Ich mag den Käse. But because we have an adjective instead, we put the N at the end of the adjective. Frischen Käse. Ich mag frischen Käse. Ich esse gern Salat mit frischem Käse. I like to eat salad with fresh cheese. With fresh cheese is used in the dative case here, because mit is a dative preposition. Frischem has an M at the end of it, because normally we would say mit dem Käse, but because there is no article, we use the M that would have been at the end of that article on the adjective. Frischem Käse. Ich esse gern Salat mit frischem Käse. Der Geruch frischen Käses gefällt mir. I like the smell of fresh cheese. Der Geruch is our subject. The genitive case shows us to whom this smell belongs, in this case, to the cheese. Frischen has an N at the end of it for the genitive form without an article. Käses still has that S at the end. Der Geruch frischen Käses gefällt mir. Weiße Milch ist am besten. White milk is the best. Here we would usually say die Milch, but because we have no article, we put the E at the end of the adjective. Weiße Milch ist am besten. The same thing happens in the accusative case. Ich mag weiße Milch. I like white milk. Weiß has an E at the end to show that it is feminine and accusative. Ich mag weiße Milch. Ich backe jeden Tag mit weißer Milch. I bake every day with white milk. Ich backe jeden Tag mit weißer Milch. Again, we're using mit, which uses the dative case. Dative and feminine normally would be der Milch, but because we don't have an article, we use the R at the end of the adjective instead. Mit weißer Milch. Ich backe jeden Tag mit weißer Milch. Ich mag den Geschmack weißer Milch aber nicht. I don't like the taste of white milk, however. Weißer Milch has an ER at the end of it because that's what happens in the genitive case for a feminine noun. Ich mag den Geschmack weißer Milch aber nicht. Grünes Gemüse sollte gesund sein. Green vegetables are supposed to be healthy. Gemüse is a neuter noun, so normally we would use an S at the end of the article, but because we don't have an article, we put the S at the end of the adjective. Grünes Gemüse. Grünes Gemüse sollte gesund sein. Green vegetables are supposed to be healthy. Meine Kinder essen täglich grünes Gemüse. My children eat green vegetables every day. Grünes Gemüse is used in the accusative case. For the same reasons I stated for the nominative case, we still have an S at the end of the adjective ending. Meine Kinder essen täglich grünes Gemüse. Wir kochen gerne mit grünem Gemüse. We like to cook with green vegetables. Mit is still going to require the dative case. Dative for neuter is going to be dem, but because we're not using an article, we put the M at the end of the adjective instead. Mit grünem Gemüse. Wir kochen gerne mit grünem Gemüse. Der Vitamingehalt grünen Gemüses ist sehr hoch. The vitamin content of green vegetables is very high. Grünen Gemüses is showing the genitive case here. There is an S at the end of the noun still, but not at the end of the adjective. Here we just have grünen. Der Vitamingehalt grünen Gemüses ist sehr hoch. Kleine Kinder lügen oft. Little children often lie. Here we would usually say die Kinder, the children, but we're using an adjective instead of an article, so we put the E at the end of the adjective. Kleine Kinder. Kleine Kinder lügen oft. Hat zwei kleine Kinder. He has two small children. Zwei does not count as an article, it's just there to tell us how many. Kleine Kinder is going to tell us the adjective ending with an E to show it's plural and accusative without having an article. Hat zwei kleine Kinder. Dieser alte Mann gibt kleinen Kindern Bonbons. This old man gives little children candies. Depending on the situation, this could be creepy or endearing. Dieser alte Mann shows us again another example using a der word, but kleinen Kindern shows us an adjective that does not have an article. We have an N at the end of everything because it is dative and plural, which requires an N for everything, including adjectives that are non-preceded. Dieser alte Mann gibt kleinen Kindern Bonbons. Die Stimmen kleiner Kinder sind erschrecklich, wenn du alleine bist. The voices of small children are terrifying if you are alone. Kleiner Kinder is in the genitive case to show us to whom the voices belong. This is genitive and plural, which means we have an R at the end of the adjective. Die Stimmen kleiner Kinder sind erschrecklich, wenn du alleine bist. Now that brings us all the way back to the chart that I gave you at the beginning of all of this. Here we have der words at the very beginning, so we have der plus E, die plus E, das plus E, etc. In the second line in each row, we have ein and then an ending. So ein plus ER, eine plus E, and ein plus ES. The third thing in there is supposed to represent non-preceded, so you could have like a number or feel or something like that, but it's then followed by some sort of ending. So blank plus ER. Another helpful part about this chart is that down at the bottom it has a list of what counts as a der word, what counts as an ein word, and what counts as unpreceded. Just don't forget that the little hashtag there is not a hashtag, it's the number sign. So number plus s equals numbers.
To truly master the German case system, you're going to need more than just this video. My book offers comprehensive lessons, extra practice, and valuable resources. Get your copy today on Amazon or wherever you buy your German books and supercharge your German learning.
Our next topic is accusative prepositions, and prepositions are basically just little words that we put in front of nouns and sometimes pronouns, and we use these words to explain a little bit more context about the sentence. So there's a fancy definition that I'm sure I could find online somewhere, but no one really cares what it is. They're just little words that we put in front of nouns or pronouns to give context to the rest of the sentence. Each of these is going to be followed by a noun or a pronoun, which means that in German we have to care about the case. So we have different prepositions using different cases throughout the entire German system. There are accusative prepositions, dative prepositions, some prepositions that use either accusative or dative based on context, and of course there are some genitive prepositions. All of that is to say, we're going to start with the accusative prepositions and kind of work our way through all of the different categories of prepositions throughout the German language. The accusative prepositions are listed on the screen now. That would include bis, until, bis, durch, which means through, durch, entlang, which means along, entlang, für, which means for, für, gegen, which means against, gegen, ohne, which means without, ohne, which means around, If you're looking for a way to remember which prepositions are in the accusative case, we of course use a song for that, and the song that we would choose for this particular group is London Bridge is Falling Down, as in London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down, London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Okay, so we're going to sing this, except we're going to do it with the prepositions that use the accusative case all of the time. Durch, für, gegen, ohne, 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 durch, für, gegen, ohne, bis und entlang. Durch, für, gegen, ohne, ohne, durch, für, gegen, ohne, bis und entlang. Durch, für, gegen, ohne, ohne, durch, für, gegen, ohne, bis und entlang. Now that we know what these prepositions are, let's get into the actual meat and potatoes here, meaning the stuff and how to use them. Here we have some example sentences. Bis, as I mentioned before, means until, and you can use it in sentences like this one. Bis nächsten Donnerstag habe ich viel zu tun. Until next Thursday, I have a lot to do. In English, we might actually translate this with by in this particular instance, but I'm trying to be consistent in the way that I translate this here. Bis nächsten Donnerstag habe ich viel zu tun. Don't forget that since we have nächsten in there, we have an adjective right before a day of the week. The day of the week is, of course, a masculine noun, as all days of the week are. And then we have bis here in front of it, which tells us that we have to use the accusative case. So we say bis nächsten Donnerstag instead of nächster Donnerstag. Der Rennkuckuck rennt durch den Tunnel. The roadrunner runs through the tunnel. Der Rennkuckuck rennt durch den Tunnel. Durch means through and is used exactly the same way as you do for the English word through, whenever you're going through something. So in this sentence we have durch den Tunnel to show us the accusative case with the masculine article den. Danny fährt sein Dreirad durchs Hotel. Danny rides his tricycle through the hotel. Danny fährt sein Dreirad durchs Hotel. Here we have a couple of things that I want to point out. First of all, durch still means through, but when you combine it with das, you can say durch das, or you can combine them together and use the word durchs. It's a kind of contraction between durch and das. We just smush them together and end up with durchs. I mentioned the word entlang before, which is a preposition, but usually it's used as a postposition, meaning that it is used after the noun that it modifies. So instead of using it in front of the noun, we now have it behind the noun. If you happen to use it as an actual preposition, which means that it goes before the noun, we actually use the genitive case with that. For example, Ich laufe entlang des Weges. I am walking along the path. Ich laufe entlang des Weges. If you are using it behind the noun, we go back to the accusative case. Ich laufe den Strand entlang. I am walking along the beach. Ich laufe den Strand entlang. Personally, I actually have a bit of difficulty believing that entlang is actually ever a postposition, but is actually just a separable prefix. So this is the verb entlang laufen, and we happen to have a direct object here. This is a bit confusing if you know anything about motion verbs, where laufen, generally speaking, cannot have a direct object, but entlang laufen is a verb and it means to walk along, and so if I said ich laufe entlang, I am walking along, the Strand here would just be the direct object. So I have a bit of a doubt in my own analysis of the grammar here, but if it is used in front of a noun, it's genitive. If it's used after the noun, it is a direct object, or it's the accusative case. Für means for, and you can use it in a sentence like this. Gibt viel Geld für die Karten aus. He is spending a lot of money for the tickets. Für die Karten is for the tickets. Gibt viel Geld für die Karten aus. He is spending a lot of money for the tickets. Similar to what we did with durch when we combined it with das and came up with durchs, we can also do that with für and das and get fürs. For example, wie viel Geld gibst du mir fürs Kaninchen? How much money will you give me for the bunny? Wie viel Geld gibst du mir fürs Kaninchen? Of course, you don't have to contract this. You can say für das, and it's perfectly acceptable either way. Was hast du gegen meinen Bruder? What do you have against my brother? Here we have the preposition gegen, which means against, and we use it here with the brother, so we say gegen meinen Bruder. Was hast du gegen meinen Bruder? Again, a masculine noun in the accusative case uses meinen, which has an en at the end of it to show that it's accusative and masculine. Ich gehe nicht nach draußen ohne meinen Mantel. Ohne means without, so this sentence says, I am not going outside without my coat. Ohne meinen Mantel, without my coat. Ich gehe nicht nach draußen ohne meinen Mantel. I am not going outside without my coat. Mein Vater fährt die Ecke. My father is driving around the corner. Die Ecke is around the corner. Means around. Similar to what we did with das in the other prepositions, we can also combine and das to get ums. Es geht rund ums Geld. It is all about the money. Es geht rund ums Geld. Is also used when we're talking about time, and you can say at a particular time. So for instance, you can say something like 3 Uhr gehen wir nach Hause. 3 Uhr gehen wir nach Hause would be at 3 o'clock we are going home. 3 Uhr gehen wir nach Hause. Confusingly, you can also use gegen with time. Instead of gegen meaning against, now when we use it with time, it has to be used as around, as in not a specific time, but around that time. So you would say, gegen 3 Uhr gehen wir nach Hause. Around 3 o'clock, we are going home. Just remember that means around when we're not talking about time, but whenever you're using it with time, it means at. And gegen means against whenever it's not being used with time, but gegen means around when we are using it with time. Next up we have the dative prepositions, basically prepositions that always use the dative case. These are little words that we put in front of nouns or pronouns. Again, that's what prepositions are. There are 9 of them on our list for today. We have aus, außer, bei, mit, nach, seit, von, zu, and gegenüber. Aus means out of or from. Aus. Außer means except, besides, or in addition to. Außer. Bei. Bei means at, with, near, or by. Bei. Mit. Mit means with. Nach. Nach means after, or to, or even towards. Nach. Seit. Seit means since, or for a period of time. Seit. Von. Von means from. Zu. Zu means to, or at. It only actually means at if you're meaning at home, however, so don't get that confused with by. Gegenüber. Gegenüber means across from. Gegenüber. If you're looking for a good way to remember the dative prepositions, we again have a song. This time the song is An der schönen blauen Donau, or the Danube Waltz. If you're unfamiliar with how this song goes, it's basically the one that goes da na 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 da na 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 da 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 na 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 na. You get the idea. Anyway, this works really well with the exception of Gegenüber. Gegenüber doesn't really fit into the song as well. So just remember that Gegenüber is on the list, but it's also one of the weird ones. So, if you don't remember Gegenüber at all, you probably would be okay. The song goes, Aus, außer, bei, mit, nach, seit, von, zu. 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 You get the idea. Just repeat that a bunch of times and you'll eventually get it. Now let's get into the example sentences of how to use these things. Aus frischem Käse macht man den besten Käsetoast. From fresh cheese, one makes the best grilled cheese. Aus frischem Käse macht man den besten Käsetoast. Aus is the preposition that requires the dative case, so Käse, being a masculine noun, has an adjective ending that has em at the end of it to match with the dative case. Aus frischem Käse. You'll notice that I translated this one with from, but you could also use out of. This is a common theme whenever we're talking about the preposition aus, because if you can't use out of as the translation, it probably actually needs to be von. Außer frischer Milch brauchen wir auch noch Kekse. Besides fresh milk, we also need cookies. Außer frischer Milch brauchen wir auch noch Kekse. Außer is either besides or in addition to, so it's not only this, followed by something later in the sentence telling us also that. Außer frischer Milch gives us again the dative case with an er at the end of the adjective for this feminine noun, Milch. Bei kritischer Würdigung können wir das Ergebnis voraussagen. With critical assessment, we can predict the outcome. Here we have the preposition by, meaning with. You could also think of it as through these means. Bei kritischer Würdigung können wir das Ergebnis voraussagen. Heute kaufe ich Wurst beim Metzger. Bei can be combined with dem to become beim. This is very similar to the things that we did with the accusative prepositions when we had durch and das become durchs. Same thing is happening here, but instead of bei dem, we now have beim. Heute kaufe ich Wurst beim Metzger. Mit frischem Gemüse macht man einen guten Salat. With fresh vegetables, one makes a good salad. Mit frischem Gemüse macht man einen guten Salat. Mit is a dative preposition, so of course it's followed by the dative case. Gemüse, being a neuter noun, has to have an m at the end of the adjective. Mit frischem Gemüse. Nach vielen Jahren kann ich endlich Deutsch sprechen. After many years, I can finally speak German. Nach vielen Jahren kann ich endlich Deutsch sprechen. Nach is again a dative preposition. Normally it would be viele Jahre, but because this is dative and plural, we say vielen Jahren. Seit einigen Jahren mache ich YouTube-Videos. For a few years, I have been making YouTube videos. Seit einigen Jahren mache ich YouTube-Videos. Seit is used for a period of time. Jahre, again, is the normal plural form of Jahr, but this sentence uses it in the dative plural, so we have einigen Jahren, and at the end of both of them for the dative plural. Ich hole heute Brötchen frisch vom Bäcker. I am getting rolls fresh from the bakery today. Ich hole heute Brötchen frisch vom Bäcker. In the same way that we can combine bei and dem, we can combine von and dem to become vom. This one's a bit confusing, however, because instead of just having von dem and having the letters still stay the same, we have an N changing to an M rather than saying von if you try to say them together. So we say vom. I am getting rolls fresh from the bakery today. Ich hole heute Brötchen frisch vom Bäcker. Von Büchern habe ich viel gelernt. I have learned a lot from books. Von Büchern is again the dative plural, that's why the N is there at the end of Bücher. Wie weit ist es von deinem Haus zu meinem? Here we have two dative prepositions. The first one is von, which is von deinem Haus, from your house. Zu meinem would be to mine, but this time we're using a possessive pronoun which I mentioned earlier in this video. Zu meinem. Wie weit ist es von deinem Haus zu meinem? How far is it from your house to mine? Wir fahren heute Abend zu meiner Oma. We are driving to my grandmother's house this evening. Zu meiner Oma implies to your grandmother's house because we didn't like LoJack grandma or something to make sure that we have a tracker on her at all times. We're saying we're going to that person, meaning to that person's house. Zu meiner Oma. To my grandmother. Was möchtest du zum Abendessen? What would you like for dinner? Here we use the translation for because it doesn't really make sense to say to the dinner, but in German this is the way that you say for dinner. Zum Abendessen. Was möchtest du zum Abendessen? Again, we have another contraction. We contracted zu and dem to become zum. Was möchtest du zum Abendessen? What would you like for dinner? Ich muss heute zur Post. I have to go to the post office today. Ich muss heute zur Post. Zur is another contraction, this time of zu and der. Combining together, they become zur Post, to the post office. Ich muss heute zur Post. You can use gegenüber either before the object or after the object, meaning that it could be a preposition, like we've been talking about, or it could be a postposition. It doesn't really make any difference one way or the other. For example, Gegenüber dem Rathaus steht ein Eiscafé. Across from the City Hall, there is an ice cream cafe. Dem Rathaus gegenüber steht ein Eiscafé. Across from the City Hall, there is an ice cream cafe. Again, it doesn't matter if it is gegenüber dem Rathaus or dem Rathaus gegenüber.
If you want to make the most of this course, my book is a must-have. It expands on everything that we cover here with more examples and exercises. Search for Mastering the German Case System on Amazon or your favorite bookstore and get started today.
Now let's talk about the two-way prepositions, also known as Wechselpräpositionen. These are probably the most hated prepositions in the German language because they can be accusative or they can be dative. It kind of depends on how they're being used. More on that here in a second. The prepositions on this list are 9. There are an, which means on if something is vertical, up and down, auf, which means on whenever something is horizontal, like a table, hinter, behind, in means either in or into, neben means next to, über means over or above, unter means under or below, vor means in front of or before, and zwischen means between. An, auf, hinter, in, neben, über, unter, vor, zwischen. The bottom line for all of these is this prepositional phrase describing a change in location? If it's changing location, then it is accusative. If it is not changing location, it is dative. Some people like to just shorten this down to say dative location, accusative motion. That's a little bit simplistic because it has to be a change of location. It can't just be that it's moving. So for instance, you can be walking but still use the dative case for these prepositions, which I'll show you here in a few examples. There are a couple of different songs that you can sing to remember these prepositions and which ones use what. You can start with using the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is the one that goes, Glory, glory, hallelujah. I don't know actually what the words to that song are, so apologies, but I do know the German version, which is two-way preposition song. An, auf, hinter, innen, neben, über, unter, vor und zwischen. Wo ist das Fragewort mit Dativ? Wohin ist Akkusativ? An, auf, hinter, innen, neben, über, unter, vor und zwischen. Wo ist das Fragewort mit Dativ? Wohin ist Akkusativ? At the end of that song, you'll hear me say, wo ist das Fragewort mit Dativ, wohin ist Accusativ, which is to say that if you can ask the question wo, as in where, you're asking something about the dative case using these prepositions. If you're asking wohin, you need the accusative case because you're saying to where. There is another version of this song if you wanted to sing, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. And that song is, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. You get the idea. Anyway, so this one goes in a different order though, which is a little bit confusing. The other one was in alphabetical order, so that was kind of helpful. But the song goes like this. Vor und hinter, über, unter, nebenan. Vor und hinter, über, unter, nebenan. Zwischen, zwischen, auf und in, zwischen, zwischen, auf und in. Wo ist Dativ, wohin ist Akkusativ? Vor und hinter, über, unter, nebenan. Vor und hinter, über, unter, nebenan. Zwischen, zwischen, auf und in, zwischen, zwischen, auf und in. Wo ist Dativ, wohin ist Akkusativ? Both of the songs that we have for the two-way prepositions do have hand motions to go with them because these are also known as the prepositions of location or prepositions of place. As a result, there are hand motions that go along with them, but because I'm recording this in a way that does not show my face, I will just direct you to the song version of all of the prepositions things that you can find in the description down below. Now, there is a little bit of a brightness at the end of this tunnel of two-way prepositions, and that is there are certain verbs that you can combine with these prepositions that will almost always use one case or the other, and there are pairs of them, meaning that there's one that uses accusative and a mirror version of that that uses the dative case. For example, legen, which means to lay. If you put something into a lying position, that's the verb legen. So you can put a piece of paper on a table, for instance. That is the verb legen. Auf den Tisch in that sentence, onto the table, would be used with the accusative case because we're using legen, which shows a change in location for that piece of paper. Once the piece of paper is there, however, that is the static location of something, and we need the verb liegen for that. So you would say, das Papier liegt auf dem Tisch. There you would use the dative case because liegen shows a static location. Stellen puts something in a standing position. So you put something standing up, such as putting a book on a shelf. If you're putting it in an upright position, that is the verb stellen. You would of course use the accusative case with this because you are moving it from one place to another. Once it is there, that puts it in a standing position. That means that it is stehen. Stehen means to stand, and if the book is standing on the table or on the shelf, that is stehen. That gives us the dative case because we are not changing the location. Setzen means to put something in a seated position. So if it's got legs and you can put it in a seated position, we use the verb setzen. Usually this is used reflexively, and we can say something like setz dich hin, which is set yourself down. When you're using it with a two-way preposition, you could say something like setz dich auf das Sofa, which would be set yourself down on the sofa. We use the accusative case here because you would say setzen changes the location of the person that is onto the couch in this sentence. Sitzen, by contrast, is the static location that results from setzen. So sitzen tells us that they are sitting. Er sitzt auf dem Sofa would be he is sitting on the sofa. The weird one is the one at the bottom of the list, which is the verb hängen. Hängen can be either or. The reason that I show these as two different verbs is because if you haven't picked up on the pattern yet, legen is a regular verb, which means that in the past tenses it becomes legte for the Präteritum and gelegt for the perfect tense. Liegen, by contrast, is an irregular verb, so it goes to lag in the simple past, or the Präteritum, and gelegen for the perfect tense. So legen, regular, liegen, irregular. Stellen is also regular, so we say stellen, stellte, gestellt for the three different forms, and then stehen is irregular and goes stehen, stand, gestanden. Setzen is regular, and we say setzen, setzte, gesetzt. But sitzen is irregular, and we say sitzen, saß, gesessen. The same thing happens to hängen. If hängen uses a direct object, that means that we use the accusative case with these two-way prepositions, and it is a regular verb. Hängen, hängte, gehängt. If, however, we do not have a direct object, meaning something is already hanging somewhere, you would then use the dative case with these two-way prepositions, and of course it means that this is now an irregular verb, and it goes hängen, hing, gehangen. I know that's probably a little bit too much to take in on one slide when I didn't have any example sentences to go along with that, so here are some example sentences. Ich hänge das Bild an die Wand. I am hanging the picture onto the wall. In this sentence I use the verb hängen with a direct object, das Bild. So the thing that is being hanged is the picture. It is being put onto the wall, and therefore we use the accusative case, an die Wand. Ich hänge das Bild an die Wand. Das Bild hängt an der Wand. The picture is hanging on the wall. In this sentence I used hängen again, but I did not use a direct object. The picture is just hanging there. It's not someone hanging the picture onto something else. An der Wand shows the location that the picture is hanging. So an der Wand, on the wall. This is dative because it is on the wall. A little bit of weirdness that goes along with the preposition an is that you can also use it with dates. So am 15. November would be on the 15th of November. In a full sentence, it might look like this. Ich habe am 15. November Geburtstag. First of all, we have am. Am is a contraction of an and dem in the same way that we had bei and dem become beim, or von and dem become vom. An and dem becomes am. Second of all, we have here 1510, which ends in en, because we have an article in front, dem, and we have an adjective that comes after that, so we have to have en for the adjective ending that follows a der word. When you're talking about time with these two-way prepositions, so whether it's in, which we'll get to here in a little bit, or if it's am, you have to use this with the dative case because time is stationary, it is not moving. Ich habe am 15. November Geburtstag. Meine Familie fährt heute an den See. My family is driving to the lake today. An den See goes to the lake. Confusingly, you can also use the verb fahren here with the dative case because you can say, Meine Familie fährt heute Fahrrad am See. My family is riding bicycles today along the lake. This means along the lake or at the lake, meaning not on the lake or in the lake or any of those other versions, but you are riding your bicycle at the same spot as the lake. So am See is how you say that. Strangely enough, if you are driving past the lake, then you would say Meine Familie fährt heute am See vorbei. When you drive past something in German, you use the preposition an and the dative case, am See. So, the differentiation between all of these sentences. The first one, Meine Familie fährt heute an den See, means that we were driving from somewhere else to the lake, and that gives us an den See. In the second one, we are driving while at the lake, and therefore am See. Meine Familie fährt heute Fahrrad am See. And in the last one, we are driving past it, but for some reason this particular phrase uses the dative case in German. Just try not to overthink it. Meine Familie fährt heute am See vorbei. The preposition auf is much more simplistic. It starts off with an example here in the accusative case. Legt das Blatt Papier auf den Tisch. He lays the piece of paper onto the table. Auf den Tisch tells us that the location was changing from somewhere other than the table to onto the table. So, legt das Blatt Papier auf den Tisch. Notice again I use the verb legen here, which tells us that we are placing something in a lying position. Das Blatt Papier liegt auf dem Tisch. The piece of paper is now lying on the table. Das Blatt Papier liegt auf dem Tisch. The verb liegen tells us the static location of something, so we have auf dem Tisch in the dative case. Ist auf dem Weg nach Hause. He is on his way home. Auf dem Weg is on the way. We're not saying on to the way. That wouldn't make much sense. Ist auf dem Weg. He is on the way. That gives us the dative case here. It's a bit more of a figurative way of looking at it, but it still means on the way, which is a static location. Where is he? He is on the way. To make things slightly more complicated, let's take a look at these examples. Geht auf dem Gehweg. He is walking on the sidewalk. He is walking on the sidewalk, meaning he's not changing his location. His location is on the sidewalk. So he started out in the beginning of this sentence on the sidewalk, and he continues to be on the sidewalk at the end of the sentence. Er geht auf dem Gehweg. If, on the other hand, he walks from somewhere else onto the sidewalk, we have to say er geht auf den Gehweg. He walks onto the sidewalk. Er geht auf den Gehweg. He walks onto the sidewalk. One really weird example that you have to worry about is stehen and auf. If you say ich stehe auf dieser Band, it means I like this band. So we use the verb stehen, which is usually a stationary thing, and the preposition auf, which would tell us the dative case if we were standing on it. However, because we use the accusative case, it's translated as I like this band. Ich stehe auf dieser Band. If you actually said auf dieser Band, it means I'm standing on this band, which means that you are literally standing on the band. Ich stehe auf dieser Band. It is a huge difference between dieser and dieser. Der Ball rollt hinter den Kühlschrank. The ball rolls behind the refrigerator. This means, of course, that it is somewhere other than behind the refrigerator, and then it rolls to that position. It is a change in location, so we say hinter den Kühlschrank in the accusative case. Der Ball ist hinter dem Sofa. The ball is behind the sofa. Der Ball ist hinter dem Sofa. We're talking about the static location of the ball, which gives us the dative case, hinter dem Sofa. Der Junge versteckt sich hinter dem Schrank. The boy is hiding himself behind the wardrobe. Again, the easiest way to figure this out is ask yourself where or to where. In the first example, we said hinter den Kühlschrank because it is rolling to where, behind the refrigerator. In the second one, we asked the question where. So where is the ball? The ball is behind the sofa. That's dative. In the last example, we asked the question where is the boy hiding? We don't say to where is the boy hiding. That wouldn't make much sense. So we use the dative case instead, hinter dem Schrank. Ich springe ins Schwimmbecken. I am jumping into the swimming pool. Ich springe ins Schwimmbecken. Ins is another contraction. This is a contraction of in and das. Again, we use the accusative case because we were jumping from the outside of the pool into the pool. In das Schwimmbecken. Ins Schwimmbecken. In the next example, we are swimming. Swimming is a motion verb, which is kind of confusing, but we are swimming within the confines of the pool, and therefore we have to use here the dative case. Ich schwimme im Schwimmbecken. I am swimming in the swimming pool. Ich schwimme im Schwimmbecken. In this sentence, we have here im, which is another contraction. This contraction is in and dem, becoming im. Der Zug kommt im Bahnhof an. The train arrives in the train station. If you're thinking, okay, the verb kommen usually means that it's a motion verb, you're right, but this sentence says to arrive, so we're asking ourselves, where is the train arriving? It's arriving in the train station. We're not saying it's arriving into the train station. It drives into the train station, but the verb to arrive tells us that it is the static location at which it arrives. Im Bahnhof. Arnold wandert in die Berge. Arnold is hiking into the mountains. Arnold wandert in die Berge. This tells us he is hiking, but he was not in the mountains at the beginning of the sentence, and he is in the end of the sentence. In die Berge shows that change. Arnold wandert in den Bergen. Arnold is hiking in the mountains. This tells us that he is in the mountains when he started hiking, and he's still in the mountains at this moment. In den Bergen does not show a change in location. He is in the mountains the entire time. Arnold wandert in den Bergen. In den letzten Jahren hat sich gar nicht verändert. He hasn't changed himself at all in the last few years. In this sentence, we use time again with the dative case because it's the same thing that happened with an. An, used with a date, has to be used with the dative case. When we're talking about something with time and in, we again use the dative case. In den letzten Jahren. It's not really a question of where he was, but more when he was. In den letzten Jahren. It's a location within time. In den letzten Jahren hat sich gar nicht verändert. He hasn't changed himself at all in the last few years. Ich lege das Buch neben die Tasse. I lay the book next to the cup. Ich lege das Buch neben die Tasse. Neben tells us next to. We took the book from somewhere else and we put it next to the cup, which tells us a change in location, neben die Tasse. Das Buch liegt neben der Tasse. The book lies next to the cup. This tells us the static location of the book next to the cup. Neben der Tasse. Ich laufe neben dem Mann. I am running next to the man. This means that I and the man are running at the same spot and we are running next to each other. Ich laufe neben dem Mann. If you put this in the accusative case, ich laufe neben den Mann, here we have to say that we are running from somewhere other than next to the man to the position of next to the man. In other words, we're running some sort of race. He is in front of me at the beginning of this sentence, and I run up to next to this person. That tells me that we are now tied in whatever place he was in before, but it tells me, of course, that it has to be the accusative case, neben den Mann. Die Kuh springt über den Mond. The cow jumps over the moon. This tells us that the cow is jumping from somewhere other than above the moon and is jumping to a position of over the moon. It probably also implies that it goes past that, but that's not technically what the sentence says. Die Kuh springt über den Mond. A change in location through the action of jumping. Über den Mond. Die Kuh steht über dem Frosch. The cow is standing over the frog. The frog is underneath the cow, therefore we have the dative case for the static location of the cow, über dem Frosch, above the frog. Meine Katze spricht mit mir über den Tod hinaus. My cat talks to me from beyond the grave. Über den Tod hinaus. This is a weird phrase, but it is something that comes up occasionally, not necessarily with cats, but über den Tod hinaus is from beyond the grave. This means that it goes above and over death. It's a more metaphysical way of thinking of this preposition, über den Tod, above the death, or from beyond the grave. Der Ball rollt unter das Sofa. The ball rolls under the sofa. It was somewhere else, now it is under the sofa, and it rolled in order to get there. This is describing that change in location, so we say unter das Sofa. Der Ball ist jetzt unter dem Sofa. The ball is now under the sofa. The ball was somewhere else, but now it's under the sofa. We're talking about the static location now, which tells us unter dem Sofa. Dative case. Ich möchte nicht mehr unter anderen Menschen sein. I do not want to be among other people anymore. This literally says under other people, but we mean it figuratively when we say this in German, so we say unter anderen Menschen, to be among other people. This uses the dative case because we're again talking about something as a static location, which in this case we're talking about it more figuratively, but it is still a static location. Ich stelle den Spielzeugzug vor das Spielzeugboot. I am putting the toy train in front of the toy boat. Stellen means to place or put something in a standing position, which is where the train is. The train is now standing in front of it, which gives us the accusative case to describe that change in location. Vor das Spielzeugboot. Der Spielzeugzug steht vor dem Spielzeugboot. Now we have the dative case because it's standing there, it's already there. Vor dem Spielzeugboot. Mein Mann besitzt eine Insel vor der Küste von Argentinien. My husband owns an island off the coast of Argentina. Vor der Küste literally means before the coast, but we mean it as in, like, right off the edge of the coast. This is just the way that it's phrased in German if something is off the coast. This is the dative case because we're saying where this island is located. Vor der Küste von Argentinien. In front of the coast or off the coast of Argentina. Stellt die Vase zwischen die Säulen. He puts the vase between the columns. The vase was somewhere else, and we are putting it to the position of in between the columns. Die Vase steht zwischen den Säulen. The vase is standing between the columns. This time, we have things in between the columns, so again, this is the static location of the vase. Zwischen den Säulen. Manchmal muss man zwischen den Zeilen lesen. Sometimes you have to read between the lines. Again, ask yourself where or to where. Where are you reading? Literally between the lines. Zwischen den Zeilen. Here, again, we may not literally mean between the lines, as this is a much more figurative way of saying things, but it is, again, a static location in this phrase. Zwischen den Zeilen. Dative case.
Finding this content helpful? Imagine how much more you'll gain with my book, Detailed lessons, practice exercises, and additional materials await you. Don't miss out. Grab your copy from Amazon or bookstores near you and master the German case system.
Next up, we have the genitive prepositions, and genitive prepositions are actually relatively high in number, meaning that there are somewhere around 17 of them that I can think of off the top of my head. But there are only a select few that you actually need to care about. The 5 that are on the screen here are the ones that I would argue are the most important, but there are, of course, a ton of other ones. We're going to start with these and then kind of move forward to the lesser-known prepositions. Anstatt means instead of. Anstelle means in place of. It's basically the same thing as anstatt, but it's slightly different. Anstatt, anstelle. Anstatt, anstelle. Trotz, in spite of or despite. Während, during. Wegen, because of. Anstatt, anstelle, trotz, während, wegen. Whatever comes after any of these prepositions is automatically going to use the genitive case. It should be noted, however, that wegen and während are often used with the dative case instead, especially in conversational German. Technically speaking, this is incorrect, but it's becoming so common at this point that it's really hard to say that it's still incorrect. Let's try some examples. Anstatt eines Hundes bekomme ich eine Katze. Instead of a dog, I get a cat. Anstatt means instead of, so we follow that up with the genitive form of dog, eines Hundes. Anstatt eines Hundes bekomme ich eine Katze. Ich kaufe eine Zeitschrift anstelle eines Buches. I am buying a magazine instead of a book. What's the difference between anstelle and anstatt? Not much most of the time. Anstelle is usually like in place of. So if you had something in this place and you want to replace it with something else, you would use anstelle to do that. But you can also use it more figuratively, which is what's being done here. Ich kaufe eine Zeitschrift anstelle eines Buches. Trotz des schlechten Wetters spielen wir Fußball. In spite of the bad weather, we are playing soccer. Trotz des schlechten Wetters spielen wir Fußball. Trotz means in spite of, so we follow that up with the genitive case des schlechten Wetters. Während des Spiels habe ich mich verletzt. During the game, I injured myself. Während des Spiels habe ich mich verletzt. Here I actually would say Spiels rather than Spieles, but technically either one would be correct. That's why I put the E in parentheses here. Spiels or Spieles, both would be acceptable. Während des Spiels habe ich mich verletzt. During is followed by the genitive case here, des Spieles. Wegen der Bedrohung ist die Straße abgeriegelt. Because of the threat, this street is cordoned off. Wegen der Bedrohung ist diese Straße abgeriegelt. Wegen is followed by the genitive case, therefore we have der for this feminine noun of Bedrohung. I mentioned that there are around 17 different prepositions that you can use with the genitive case. Here are a few of the lesser known ones. There are a few of them that just show the side that something is on. So we have innerhalb, inside of, außerhalb, outside of, oberhalb, above, unterhalb, under, diesseits, this side of, and jenseits, on the other side of. You can also use seitens in that same category and use on the part of. In addition to those sides, we also have anlässlich, on the occasion of, Kraft, by virtue of or by the power of, laut, meaning according to, aufgrund, on the basis of or because of, and bezüglich, with regard to, innerhalb, außerhalb, oberhalb, unterhalb, diesseits, jenseits, seitens, anlässlich, Kraft, laut, aufgrund, bezüglich. Now let's try some examples. Rauchen ist innerhalb des Gebäudes verboten. Smoking is forbidden inside of the building. Rauchen ist innerhalb des Gebäudes verboten. Außerhalb des Gebäudes sollte man auch nicht rauchen. You shouldn't smoke outside of the building either. Außerhalb des Gebäudes sollte man auch nicht rauchen. That's a whole lot of in that sentence. Die Sommerrodelbahn liegt auf dem Berg oberhalb der Stadt. The summer toboggan run is located on the mountain above the city. Die Sommerrodelbahn liegt auf dem Berg oberhalb der Stadt. Der Räuber grub unterhalb der Bank. The robber dug under the bank. Der Räuber grub unterhalb der Bank. Diesseits der Grenze ist Marihuana illegal. On this side of the border, marijuana is illegal. Diesseits der Grenze ist Marihuana illegal. Jenseits der Grenze kann man es legal kaufen. On the other side of the border, one can buy it legally. Jenseits der Grenze kann man es legal kaufen. Anlässlich seines 100. Geburtstags flog nach Las Vegas. On the occasion of his 100th birthday, he flew to Las Vegas. Anlässlich seines 100. Geburtstags flog nach Las Vegas. Kraft des Gesetzes sollten wir nicht ohne Grund ins Gefängnis. By virtue of the law, we shouldn't go to jail without a cause. Kraft des Gesetzes sollten wir nicht ohne Grund ins Gefängnis. Laut des Wetterberichts sollte es morgen regnen. According to the weather forecast, it is supposed to rain tomorrow. Laut des Wetterberichts sollte es morgen regnen. Flamingos sind aufgrund ihrer Nahrung pink. Flamingos are pink because of their food. Flamingos sind aufgrund ihrer Nahrung pink. Es gab eine große Demonstration seitens der Opposition. There was a large demonstration on the part or on the side of the opposition. Es gab eine große Demonstration seitens der Opposition. Der Bewerber hat ein paar Fragen bezüglich des Vorstellungsgesprächs. The applicant has a few questions with regards to the interview. Der Bewerber hat ein paar Fragen bezüglich des Vorstellungsgesprächs. In addition to the prepositions that we normally use with the accusative case, there are certain times when a preposition will just be kind of attached to a verb, and it will be used in a way that doesn't really fit the same ways that we usually use that particular preposition. For example, entscheidet sich für die Pizzeria. He decides himself for the pizzeria. Entscheidet sich für die Pizzeria. This does not mean that he's making decisions for the pizzeria, like literally speaking. He is making decisions for himself that he would go to the pizzeria. So this isn't exactly the same kind of way that we would usually use the preposition für. Wir bitten Sie Vergebung. We are asking you for forgiveness. When you are asking for something in German, is the preposition that you use, even though that does not usually mean the word for. Wir bitten Sie Vergebung. When a two-way preposition is used in this way, we have to worry about whether it's accusative or dative, but it's a little bit more murky this time because we're not sure if this is showing motion or not. While you could make the argument most of the time, it's probably just in your best interest to figure out, is this one using accusative or is this using dative with these two-way prepositions when it doesn't literally mean a change in location. It's a little bit difficult to understand sometimes, so let me walk you through some examples. Ich denke an dich. I am thinking about you. How did we get the idea that an dich should be the way we phrase this instead of an dir? Well, technically speaking, you're casting your thoughts in the direction of this person, so you're changing the location of your thoughts. My thoughts were in my own head, now I'm thinking about you, which is where my thoughts are now. So I changed the location of my thoughts. Ich denke an dich. I understand this is a bit of a stretch for the thought process, but that's also the reason I would argue just to memorize the list rather than thinking about all of the logical ways you could come up with for why this should use the accusative. Wartest du auf den Bus? Are you waiting for the bus? If you're waiting for something in German, first of all, we don't say für, we say auf. And second of all, it uses the accusative case because it does. I don't actually have a good reason for why. This is just auf den Bus because waiting for something in German uses the preposition auf with the accusative case. If I were to do a video that had all of the prepositional phrases that go with fixed prepositions together, I would have to do an entirely different video because that would take another hour. To make it so that I don't have to do that in a video that is probably already long enough, I will just instead use this list here, which is a list that uses the accusative case and is relatively extensive. Denken an is to think about. Sich erinnern an is to remember. Glauben an is to believe in. Sich freuen auf is to look forward to. Warten auf is to wait for, and sorgen für is to take care of. All of these use the accusative case, and with the exception of für, we had two-way prepositions, so of course we had to figure out which one uses what. Erinnerst du dich immer noch an dieses Mädchen? Do you still remember this girl? Erinnerst du dich immer noch an dieses Mädchen? We use the accusative case with this preposition because that's what the German language decided to do, so we say an dieses Mädchen. Ich glaube nicht mehr an den Osterhasen. I no longer believe in the Easter Bunny. Ich glaube nicht mehr an den Osterhasen. And our last example here, meine Tochter freut sich auf das Wochenende. My daughter is looking forward to the weekend. Meine Tochter freut sich auf das Wochenende. Obviously, if there are fixed prepositions that we can use with the accusative case, we can also use some with the dative case. So here are a few examples of that. Ein Leben besteht aus vielen kleinen Momenten. A life consists of a lot of small moments. Bestehen is almost always followed by aus. Consists of, besteht aus. Ein Leben besteht aus vielen kleinen Momenten. Seine Frau bleibt immer noch bei ihm. His wife is still staying with him. Bei ihm would be with him. It could also mean like figuratively with him as opposed to just physically with him. Seine Frau bleibt immer noch bei ihm. You can obviously also use these two-way prepositions that we mentioned before with the dative case when combined with certain verbs. For example, ich arbeite an meinem neuen Auto. I am working on my new car. This one actually could be literally taken, so where are you working? I'm working at my new car, or working on it, like right next to it, kind of in the same way that we used sei earlier, but this one is kind of in the same category as the other ones. Ich arbeite an meinem neuen Auto. Die Zwillinge unterscheiden sich in ihren Eigenarten. The twins differ in their mannerisms. To differ in something in German, we have unterscheiden followed by in as the preposition. Die Zwillinge unterscheiden sich in ihren Eigenarten. Again, there is a huge list of these verbs and prepositions that are combined like this, and if you want a real list of that, there is some linked in the description, but here are a few of the more popular ones. Sich täuschen in, to be wrong about something. Sich fürchten vor, to be afraid of something. Schützen vor, to protect from, and warnen vor, to warn about. Chuck Norris fürchtet sich vor dem Yeti nicht. Chuck Norris is not afraid of the Yeti. Chuck Norris fürchtet sich vor dem Yeti nicht. Der Regenschirm schützt mich vor dem Regen. The umbrella protects me from the rain. Der Regenschirm schützt mich vor dem Regen. Meine Mutter hat mich vor solchen Männern gewarnt. My mother warned me about men like that. Meine Mutter hat mich vor solchen Männern gewarnt.
You've made it this far into the video, so I know you are serious about your German learning. That means I know you wouldn't just watch a video and think that you have all of the knowledge that you will ever need on this topic. That would just be naive. So you need to practice what you learned here. You need to review it. You also need to make sure that it is solidified in your mind. My book, Mastering the German Case System, goes beyond what we've discussed in this video. It includes detailed explanations, extra examples, practice exercises, and a ton of additional materials to boost your German learning. You can find it on Amazon or pretty much anywhere you buy books by searching for Mastering the German Case System. If you have any questions or need further clarification on any topic, leave a comment down below and I'll be happy to help. Keep practicing, stay motivated, and remember, with dedication and the right resources, you will be speaking German fluently in no time. Das ist alles für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!